Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, right into the bustling streets of 12th century Cairo. Picture this, the clamor of hundreds of vendors calling out their wares, their voices rising above the constant hum of bartering and negotiating. You can hear the sharp crack of leather, the jingle of coins, the clinking of metal, and the soft, rhythmic rustle of fabrics fluttering in the warm breeze. The streets are crowded, alive with the energy of an ancient metropolis. The air, thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and spices, mingles with the occasional aroma of roasted meats cooking in the open. It's a sensory overload, but it's also a world of charm and commerce. Now, before you get comfortable imagining yourself in the middle of this busy marketplace, here's a cheeky reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this. If you think you can handle the fast-paced life of a street vendor, think again. The weather would be scorching, and the sounds would be deafening. But let's ease into this journey of history, where you'll see how the street vendors of Cairo made a living, served their customers, and even contributed to the heart of the city's economy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And by the way, feel free to drop your location and the time of day it is for you. I'm curious to know where you're tuning in from while we dive into the vibrant market scenes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine that it's a typical day in Cairo, and the streets are alive with the hum of activity. The city, at this time, is one of the most prosperous in the world, a vibrant hub of trade and culture. But amid the grand mosques and towering palaces, it's the street vendors that truly define the everyday life of the city. Every corner, every narrow alley, seems to host a new stall or merchant, each offering something unique. You can almost hear the footsteps of customers as they wander from stall to stall, inspecting every item with curiosity. The vendors, who stand behind their makeshift counters, are masters of persuasion. With their wares neatly arranged before them, they call out to the passers-by, inviting them to haggle for their products. In the center of it all is the smell, fresh bread straight from the baker's oven, spices like cinnamon and cumin wafting through the air, and the occasional waft of meat sizzling on a small grill. The market in Cairo during the 12th century was not just a place for buying and selling. It was where you met people from all walks of life, heard stories from distant lands, and experienced the heartbeat of a city that connected the East and the West. The street vendors in Cairo weren't just offering goods. They were offering a taste of culture, a glimpse into the richness of a society on the move, evolving and adapting to the ever-changing world around them. Every product on display, whether it was food, cloth, or tools, was a piece of a larger global network that extended from Asia to Africa and beyond. You might have just purchased some fresh figs from a vendor who had them shipped in from the farthest reaches of the Mediterranean, or perhaps you're eyeing a piece of fine linen, woven in the mountains of Syria. Despite their central role in the bustling economy, the street vendors were not living in luxury. Their work was long and hard, often beginning before the sun rose and stretching late into the evening. While the wealthy merchants and the grand palace markets were there to display fine jewelry and silks, the street vendors of Cairo provided the everyday essentials. They were the lifeblood of the city, ensuring that even the poorer citizens could afford to live, eat, and sustain themselves in this urban landscape. Imagine walking down a crowded Cairo street in the 12th century. You step over uneven cobblestones, past brightly colored fabrics hanging on lines, their intricate designs telling stories of far-off lands. You brush past baskets full of fresh fruit, pomegranates, figs, and grapes spilling out of their woven containers. The air is warm, but there's a soft breeze carrying the sounds of distant chatter and the occasional clink of coins as deals are struck. At one stall, you hear the jarring sound of a blacksmith hammering metal, and just ahead, a spice vendor offers a generous pinch of saffron, hoping to tempt you into a purchase. It's a chaotic, but wonderfully lively scene. Everything is in motion, from the people haggling to the carts that roll by, transporting goods across the city. It's easy to imagine that the marketplace was a living, breathing entity, a place where each day, the story of Cairo unfolded through its vendors and customers. It was here, on these streets, that the pulse of the city could be felt most vividly. From the hum of everyday commerce to the lively banter between merchants and customers, these markets were more than just commercial hubs. They were social spaces, places where relationships were forged and cultures intermingled. It's here that you would have experienced the true essence of 12th century Cairo, and where the character of the city was defined. Now, as we continue this stroll through the vibrant streets of Cairo, let's dive deeper into the life of the street vendors themselves. These were not just traders peddling wares, they were the lifeblood of the city, and their role went beyond the simple act of selling. The vendors in 12th century Cairo were at the very heart of its bustling economy, crafting a dynamic and diverse marketplace that stretched across the narrow alleys, winding streets, and open squares of the city. Their lives were far from easy, often defined by long hours spent in the sun, haggling with customers, and competing against fellow vendors. But they thrived because they were essential to the flow of daily life. Imagine a vendor in his stall, standing behind a simple wooden table, his face weathered by years of exposure to the harsh sun. His goods, whether freshly baked bread, spices, or fabric, are laid out before him, ready for inspection. A steady stream of customers approaches, each one a potential sale, each one with their own preferences, their own budget, and their own level of patience. To survive in the competitive market of Cairo, a vendor had to have more than just goods. They had to have a sharp mind, a persuasive tongue, and an understanding of how to make a deal. Cairo's markets were full of everything you could imagine and more. You could find street vendors offering fresh vegetables, ripe fruit, dried fish, and salted meats from the Nile's bounty. You could stop by the stall of a vendor offering perfumes, their bottles beautifully carved from glass and filled with exotic fragrances, wafting through the air. Then there were the jewelers, whose pieces sparkled in the sunlight, catching the attention of anyone passing by. The smells of spices, cardamom, cumin, and cinnamon were everywhere, with vendors touting their wares, ready to offer samples to entice you into making a purchase. But let's not get caught up in the glamour of the market just yet. What's most fascinating about these vendors was how deeply they were woven into the fabric of Cairo's society. They were not just selling products, they were playing an active role in the urban ecosystem. The market was not a one-way transaction, it was a place of social interaction. This is where merchants and workers, men and women, young and old came together to exchange more than just goods. Here, news spread, gossip flourished, and, importantly, connections were made. Historians still argue about the extent to which these street vendors were integrated into the upper echelons of Cairo's society. Some believe that many vendors were quite humble, simply trying to make a living, while others suggest that some street vendors held significant social status to their ability to conduct business with affluent families and royal courts. It's likely that these vendors were the lifeblood of the middle class in Cairo, their influence stretching into every corner of the city's social, cultural, and economic landscapes. It wasn't just the wealthy elite who relied on the marketplace. The street vendors also played a vital role in the lives of the common folk. The poor and the middle class of Cairo were just as reliant on these street markets for their daily needs. Without the vendors, life in Cairo would have been a much harder existence, and the everyday person wouldn't have had access to the things they needed for survival. These vendors were an essential part of Cairo's community, and their markets served as meeting points, places where relationships were formed, deals were struck, and the pulse of the city could truly be felt. But let's pause here for a second and think about something. Imagine you are one of these vendors in Cairo. You have your stall, set up on a busy street corner, your goods spread out before you. You don't have a fancy shop or a market stand, just a few simple tables. Now, your day begins before dawn. The market opens early, and you can already hear the clamor of the vendors setting up their stalls, preparing for the rush. You work tirelessly, calling out to passers-by, trying to convince them to stop, to examine your goods, to buy. The bargaining begins, and it can get tough. But you know that if you play your cards right, you will make enough to sustain your family for the week. It's not easy, but it's how you survive. In this context, one of the most significant aspects of a street vendor's life was their ability to negotiate. Bargaining was an art form in Cairo's markets. Merchants didn't just sell products, they sold their personalities, their charm, their wit. The ability to haggle effectively, to win over a customer and secure a fair deal, was key to a vendor's survival. Imagine how these conversations would unfold. Lively, animated exchanges, with the occasional laughter or groans of frustration as prices were set, and eventually agreed upon. Sometimes the deal would end with the vendor throwing in a small extra, a gesture meant to ensure the customer's loyalty and make them feel they had truly won in the exchange. But the real power of the street vendor was not just in the trade, it was in their role as the everyday face of Cairo's thriving market economy. These were the individuals who made things happen, who kept the wheels of commerce turning. They were a vital part of the city's ecosystem, representing not just the flow of goods, but the very heart of Cairo itself. Now that we've begun to see the pulse of Cairo's streets, let's take a closer look at the goods themselves, the ones that fueled this market and made the vendors' lives as dynamic as they were. Cairo, in the 12th century, was a crossroads for trade, with merchants bringing in goods from across the Mediterranean, Africa, and even the Far East. The markets, particularly the ones where street vendors plied their trade, were a microcosm of this global exchange. If you were to wander through, you'd see everything from the familiar to the utterly exotic. Let's start with the basics. Food. Cairo's market was home to an array of street food that would fuel the common folk of the city. Bread, grains, and legumes were among the most widely sold items. Imagine the scent of freshly baked bread, filling the air as vendors shouted out to potential customers. This was no ordinary bread, though. Loaves baked in the traditional styles of the city were an art form in themselves. The thick, crusty outer layer encased a soft, warm interior. A fresh loaf of bread was affordable, filling, and the cornerstone of many a meal. But it wasn't just bread that caught the eye of the passers-by. Think about the different types of grains, lentils, and beans that lined the stalls, waiting to be scooped up into bags and sold to the customers. Lentils were a common food staple, often used in hearty soups and stews. These items were affordable, and they were the essential fuel for a day of hard work. For street vendors, food sales often brought in the most customers, and it was their ability to provide fresh, affordable sustenance that ensured their livelihood. Moving away from the staple foods, we now get to the more exotic items that made Cairo's marketplace stand out. Spices. Oh, the spices. The streets of Cairo in the 12th century were filled with the heady aroma of cinnamon, cumin, coriander, saffron, and cardamom. Walk past a spice merchant, and the air would be thick with the warm, comforting scents of cinnamon and cloves, a fragrant reminder of the vast trade networks that passed through Cairo. These spices were not just for flavor, they were valuable, traded and coveted by those who had the wealth to afford them. Even if you didn't have the money to buy a handful of these exotic spices, you could still experience their scent as you passed by. But did you know that the merchants didn't just sell the spices themselves? They were also selling something more interesting: perfumes. Yes, those wonderful scents we associate with luxury and wealth were often made from the very spices and flowers sold in the market. The vendors who sold perfumes were considered highly skilled artisans, carefully blending oils and essences into delicate bottles of fragrance. A walk through Cairo's marketplace would have offered not only the olfactory experience of fresh herbs and spices, but also the subtlety of exotic perfumes. It was a world where scent played an important part in daily life, offering both luxury and a functional benefit. Now, as you stroll deeper into the market, you come across another category of goods: fabrics. Textiles were another vital part of Cairo's street trade. The vendors here were likely some of the most popular on the market, selling brightly colored silks, cottons, and wools. Imagine the soft touch of cotton fabric, the intricate patterns woven into the fabrics from Syria, Persia, and beyond. Each piece of fabric told its own story, woven with designs passed down through generations. The marketplace was full of traders selling textiles from faraway lands, and it was here, in the marketplace, that these materials were made accessible to everyday people. The allure of foreign fabrics was strong. They weren't just functional, they were symbols of wealth and status. For those who could afford them, these textiles became a way to display one's social standing. A piece of fine silk, imported from China or India, could be used to create clothing, drapes, or cushions. For the vendor, these items represented a direct link to the rest of the world. Through their fabrics, they brought the entire world into Cairo. The markets didn't just connect Cairo to Egypt, they connected it to the farthest reaches of Asia, Africa, and Europe. As you move through the marketplace, your eyes are drawn to the smaller trinkets and ornaments. These were popular among the local population, who enjoyed buying pieces of jewelry and small artifacts as reminders of their cultural identity or as signs of their own social standing. Vendors sold silver jewelry, glass beads, and ornate, beautifully crafted items, some of which would have been imported from places like the Byzantine Empire or Persia. These smaller luxury items were as much about status as they were about beauty. But what about the lesser-known wares? You may stumble upon small knickknacks or tools, things that, at first glance, don't seem as exciting as the perfumes or silks. But these were the humble yet essential goods of the marketplace: metal tools, pottery, baskets, and pottery, all crafted by local artisans. These items were the backbone of the city. While the wealthier citizens could afford the more exotic goods, it was these everyday items that kept the city's working class going. The vendors who sold them weren't always seeking riches, but they were contributing in their own way to the continuity of Cairo's bustling economy. As you reflect on these goods, imagine the mix of different cultures that all came together in one place. The marketplace in Cairo was a confluence of global trade. It was a space where people, goods, and ideas collided. The vendors were not just selling items, they were part of a global exchange. And though many of these vendors may have seemed humble in comparison to the grand palaces or elite merchants, they held an essential place in the vibrant heartbeat of Cairo. Now, let's take a moment to explore the fascinating social dynamics between the vendors and their customers. As much as the goods they sold were important, it was the relationships formed in the marketplace that really brought it to life. Picture yourself strolling through the crowded alleys, the heat of the midday sun beating down on you, and around every corner, a new vendor is calling out to you, eager to make a sale. But this wasn't just about buying and selling. This was also about interaction, negotiation, and, for many, the chance to socialize. Street vendors in Cairo weren't just offering products, they were offering an experience. They played a significant role in daily life, not only as traders, but also as part of the social fabric of the city. People from all walks of life, rich and poor, young and old, would frequent these markets. The vendors, with their sharp wits and well-practiced charm, were often the glue that held this social interaction together. You could spend an hour just talking to a vendor, catching up on the latest gossip, hearing about the day's events, or exchanging stories about distant lands. The market wasn't just a place for commerce, it was a place for community. As you wander from one stall to the next, you begin to notice that the vendors are more than just business people. They are part of a larger network. Some might have been selling similar products, but they all knew one another, often greeting each other with a friendly smile or a wave. It was the same in the local neighborhoods around the marketplace. Vendors were often familiar faces in the daily lives of the people. They had a sense of ownership over their stalls and their products, and customers often built relationships with their favorite vendors over time. Now, think about the bargaining process that unfolded in these lively markets. You'd probably find yourself in a game of cat and mouse, negotiating prices with the vendors who, in turn, were trying to get the best deal for themselves. Bartering wasn't just a transaction, It was an art. It required wit, patience, and a bit of charm. Vendors would offer their goods, always with the expectation that the customer would haggle over the price. Sometimes, the back and forth would go on for minutes. Other times, it would take longer, with customers walking away in mock defeat, only to be called back with a better price. As we consider the art of negotiation in these markets, we should remember that it wasn't just about getting the best deal, it was about the social interaction and the skill involved in the exchange. Historians still argue about how much bartering was a skill that was passed down from vendor to vendor, or if it was simply an inherent part of street life. Regardless, it was a significant part of the experience. It wasn't uncommon to see people laughing, arguing playfully, and even offering a gift to seal a deal. The vendors and customers often relied on good humor and an understanding of how the transaction would unfold. But for all the socializing and the entertainment that the bargaining provided, this was also the vendor's livelihood. It wasn't all fun and games. Street vendors had to be savvy. They had to know when to push for a higher price and when to concede. But it was not just about their own success. Their transactions were interconnected with the rest of the marketplace. If one vendor made a deal, it could ripple through the rest of the market. Prices would adjust, and people would know to expect certain goods at particular prices. We can also reflect on the role of women in the market. While men were often seen as the primary vendors, women also played a significant role in the marketplace, particularly as sellers of food, drink, and cloth. Street vendors were a crucial part of the working class in Cairo, and women, though sometimes constrained by societal expectations, found ways to carve out space for themselves in the market. Some might have operated their own stalls, while others helped family members or sold items on behalf of other traders. Despite the challenges they faced in a male-dominated society, women made their mark in Cairo's bustling trade world. You can imagine the energy in the air as you walk through these markets, the mingling of voices, the laughter, the gentle calls of merchants. Everything is in motion. And it's here, in the lively hustle and bustle of the streets, that Cairo's unique culture truly reveals itself. There's a sense of unity in this diversity. Vendors, customers, tradespeople, all coming together to ensure that the city remains alive and thriving. The markets are not just a backdrop to daily life, they are a central, vibrant force that shapes the very essence of the city. But, as with all thriving markets, there were also challenges. There was competition among vendors. Each one had to prove their worth, to show that their goods were better or more unique than the next person's. Some vendors, in their desperation for business, would try to undercut their competition, offering deals that were too good to be true. This created a bit of tension in the marketplace, as every vendor sought to outdo the other. However, this competition also led to a remarkable level of quality. The vendors, in their pursuit of success, would often go above and beyond to ensure that their goods were of the highest standard. Whether it was the bread they baked, the spices they sold, or the fabrics they wove, the quality of the products often reflected the vendors' dedication to their craft. And this competition pushed the vendors to keep improving, creating an atmosphere of constant innovation and improvement. Historians often note that this intense competition played a significant role in shaping the economy of Cairo during this period. The street vendors, through their daily interactions, not only fed the people, they fed the city's growth. Every transaction, every haggled deal, every exchange of goods played a part in the larger economic structure of the city. The vendors were not just merchants, they were the engines that drove Cairo's economy forward. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, a different kind of energy takes over Cairo's streets. The marketplace, though still bustling, takes on a new life as the day's heat fades and a cooler breeze blows in. This is when the night vendors begin their trade, those who operate when the sun goes down, selling their wares under the dim glow of lanterns. Imagine the flickering lights casting long shadows over the bustling market streets. The atmosphere shifts. It becomes quieter, more intimate. The night vendors, often overlooked in the daylight rush, now rise to prominence. They offer a unique set of goods, sometimes essentials, but also the more exotic, the more luxurious. You see, not all street vendors in Cairo were day traders. While many of the regular merchants operated in the daylight, selling food and simple wares, the night vendors had their own niche. Picture yourself walking down the darkened streets, the distant sound of music and the muffled chatter of late-night patrons blending into the air. There's a magical quality to this nighttime marketplace. It's quieter, but there's a sense of mystery in the air. What might you find at these hidden stalls that only appear once the sun sets? Some of these vendors sold items of luxury. Think fine silk and perfume, to commodities that, during the daytime, might be difficult to acquire in such a public place. But when the city's bustle dies down, those with the right connections know exactly where to go for these treasures. The scent of incense fills the air, and the dark alleys of Cairo's marketplace offer products that reflect the more opulent aspects of the city's life. It's a world of wealth hidden in plain sight, and only those in the know have access to it. This quieter world beneath the flicker of oil lamps would offer luxury items like perfumes distilled from exotic flowers and spices, products that came from distant lands such as India, China, or Persia. These were the goods that defined Cairo's connection to the wider world. The night vendors were an integral part of this hidden economy. On the other hand, for the more common folk, the night market still offered essential goods, fresh bread, meat, and vegetables, just like the daytime vendors. Yet, the atmosphere was more relaxed. There wasn't the same frenetic energy as the daytime trade. The bargains were calmer, more private. For those who worked long hours during the day, the night vendors offered an after-hours respite, a place to find fresh goods, have a quiet chat, and, of course, continue bargaining. As you wander through the lantern-lit streets, you begin to notice the slight differences in how business is conducted after dark. Gone are the loud calls of merchants trying to outshout one another. Instead, the street vendors speak more softly, their voices barely rising above the ambient sounds of the evening. The bargaining isn't as aggressive, and there's an air of understanding between the vendor and customer. Many of the people who shop at night are not in a rush. They are not looking for immediate goods, but rather for something special, something more leisurely. The deals may not be as aggressive, but they are just as important. Vendors and customers both have a more relaxed attitude, but the social and economic value of the transaction remains unchanged. But how did these nighttime markets come to be so important? Historians still debate the origins of the Cairo night market, as it wasn't just the luxury goods that kept people coming back, it was the very culture of the market itself. Some scholars suggest that, as Cairo's economy grew, it became necessary to extend trading hours in order to cater to the increasing demand. Others argue that the night markets were born out of necessity. The people who worked during the day couldn't afford to spend their time in the busy daytime market, so the vendors adapted by staying open into the evening hours. The night shift, if you will, became a way for the vendors to service a different type of customer, who, perhaps, wanted to avoid the chaos of the daytime marketplace. This idea of the nighttime economy also sheds light on Cairo's position in the global marketplace. At any given time, Cairo was bustling with trade from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Goods from every corner of the world flowed into the city, and the night vendors served as an extension of this interconnected global network. Whether it was rare spices from India, luxurious silks from China, or the prized fabrics of Persia, the night vendors were often the ones to handle these high-end projects. And while the more common goods, bread, grains, and produce, were still very much present, the night market was a place where the wealthier citizens of Cairo could come to acquire those items that told of the city's vast trade connections. Yet, despite the importance of these nocturnal markets, they were not without their risks. The late hours could bring danger, and while the lighting of lanterns and torches offered some security, the darkness also provided cover for less than reputable activities. Theft, swindling, and even street fights were not uncommon, and vendors had to be wary of both their competition and their customers. To keep their goods secure, vendors often relied on makeshift barricades, hired guards, or sometimes their own street smarts. After all, selling rare and expensive goods meant knowing who you could trust and who you couldn't. And what about the vendors themselves? How did they survive these late nights? While many of the vendors had helpers, the night vendors often worked alone, a reflection of the specialized nature of their goods. They worked late into the night, sometimes closing up only when the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The stamina required for such a schedule was no small feat. These vendors had a different type of resilience, one forged through long hours of work, perseverance, and a deep understanding of the nighttime rhythms of the market. Their ability to adapt to a dual schedule of day and night commerce made them the lifeblood of Cairo's 12th century market economy. As you reflect on the quiet after-hours world of Cairo's night markets, you begin to realize that the city isn't just a hub of daytime activity. The night vendors played an equally vital role in the city's bustling economy, offering both the essentials and the luxuries that define Cairo's position in the global marketplace. And though their hours were long and their lives were filled with uncertainty, they were an integral part of a living, breathing world that never truly rested. The night markets were a symbol of Cairo's vibrancy, a place where trade never stopped, and the city's pulse continued, even under the veil of darkness. Let's step back into the daylight now, as the sun rises again, bringing the energy of a new day to Cairo's streets. With the arrival of the morning light, the city begins to stir once more. The night vendors close up their stalls, giving way to the daylight traders. And as the market begins to fill again with the hum of bargaining, the familiar sound of busy vendors plying their wares fills the air. This is when Cairo's streets truly come alive, when the vibrant, chaotic pulse of the market can be felt in every corner, every alley, and every bustling street. While we've seen the quieter, more intimate world of the night market, the daytime market in Cairo was on an entirely different scale. As the sun climbs higher, so does the energy in the market. The streets are now teeming with people. The vendors who specialize in food begin to heat their flatbreads on their open-air griddles. The smell of fresh bread, thick, warm, and enticing, spreads through the air, tempting passers-by. You can practically taste the scent as it mixes with the aroma of meat roasting on spits, the fragrant spices wafting from stalls, and the occasional whiff of sweet dates or figs. It's a sensory overload, one that makes it impossible to walk by without wanting to stop and sample something. It's in the daylight hours that the real work begins for Cairo's street vendors. Every vendor, whether they're selling food, textiles, or trinkets, has to be at their best, offering their goods with energy and passion. It's not just about selling products, it's about providing an experience. The vendors know that to capture the attention of the bustling crowd, they must call out, be present, and engage with every potential customer. The art of attracting someone's attention is as much a part of the job as the selling itself. But let's look closer at the bread vendors. These were some of the most essential figures in the market, as bread was a staple food for everyone. A typical day would start early, with the bakery vendors hauling large sacks of flour, setting up their griddles, and preparing the dough. But the baking was only half of the story. The real charm came in the way the bread was sold. The vendors didn't just offer a loaf and send customers on their way. No, the bread vendors had their own unique way of making the sale feel like a special moment. They would knead the dough in front of the customer, shaping the bread with a skill that spoke of years of practice. As the dough rose and bubbled on the griddle, customers could watch their food being made fresh, right before their eyes. The interaction was part of the experience, an essential part of the marketplace culture. The vendors knew that the visual appeal of their bread, the smell of it baking, and the friendly banter with customers would keep people coming back for more. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on customer interaction was unique to Cairo or a more widespread practice across the Muslim world. Some scholars believe that the level of personal engagement in these marketplaces was a defining characteristic of medieval Cairo, where relationships, both personal and commercial, were intricately woven into the fabric of everyday life. Whether it was the bread vendor or the spice merchant, a sense of familiarity and trust was often built through daily encounters. These weren't just businesses, they were connections that were cultivated through repeated interactions, a vital part of both social and economic life. The daytime market was not only a place for food, though, it was also where you could find everything else you might need in your daily life. From the finely woven textiles that lined the fabric vendor's stall to the wooden crates full of small, handmade tools, the market was a reflection of the needs and desires of Cairo's people. If you were a craftsman, you could find the tools you needed. If you were looking for clothing, there were stalls offering the finest silks and cottons. If you needed a simple pot to cook your evening stew, there were pottery vendors offering their wares, ready to haggle for the right price. One of the most striking features of Cairo's marketplace was the diversity of goods available. Vendors didn't just sell locally made products. They sold items that came from far-flung places. Goods traveled to Cairo from across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Spices from India, silks from China, jewelry from Persia. All these treasures passed through Cairo's bustling markets. For the people who lived in Cairo, this was a source of both pride and fascination. The marketplace wasn't just a place of exchange. It was a symbol of Cairo's connection to the wider world. Cairo was a melting pot of cultures, and its marketplace reflected that. As the sun rises each day, this grand exchange of cultures, goods, and ideas comes to life in a way that is both chaotic and beautiful. As you wander through the streets, weaving your way through the crowds, you can't help but feel the rhythm of the marketplace. The vendors shout their prices, customers haggle, and the entire market seems to pulse with life. You feel connected to the past in a way that is both immediate and timeless. The vendor's voice rings out, inviting you to come closer, to inspect their goods, to be part of this living, breathing tapestry that is Cairo's marketplace. But let's not forget the rhythm of the human interactions as well. For the vendors, these interactions were more than just a chance to sell. They were opportunities to connect, to build relationships with regular customers, to form bonds that would last over years. In this world, the marketplace wasn't just a place to buy and sell. It was a place where people came together. It was a space where families, strangers, and communities could unite over the shared purpose of commerce, of exchanging goods, and, perhaps most importantly, of sharing stories. As we wrap up our look at the vibrant daytime marketplace in 12th century Cairo, we can reflect on how this world was not just about economic transactions. It was about culture, connection, and the way that the exchange of goods also fostered a deeper exchange between people. In the fast-paced, bustling markets of Cairo, you weren't just buying bread or silk, you were participating in something much larger. You were part of the heartbeat of a city that thrived because of its people and its vendors. As we continue to stroll through the market's winding lanes, let's take a moment to step away from the goods themselves and consider the people, the customers and vendors alike, who made Cairo's streets such a dynamic space. While the goods on display, from food to fabrics, were the visible heartbeat of the market, it was the relationships, the bustling interactions, and the negotiations that truly brought it to life. Picture this: the sun is high now, casting its golden glow on the crowds moving through the narrow streets. Men and women, merchants and customers, old and young, are all mingling, some with purpose, others simply wandering, drawn by the promise of something new. The vendors, who spend their days on the streets of Cairo, come from a variety of backgrounds. While some are local artisans, others are immigrants or descendants of merchants who've traveled from far-off lands, bringing with them their own customs, practices, and unique goods. The street vendor was, in many ways, a bridge between the wider world and the immediate cityscape of Cairo. Their stalls didn't just represent their individual business interests. They also symbolized the flow of cultural exchange that kept Cairo connected to the rest of the known world. Consider a particular vendor, someone who would have likely stood in the same spot day after day. A spice merchant, for example, whose stall was piled high with vibrant piles of cinnamon, saffron, cardamom, and cloves. His goods, so valuable and treasured, would have been brought in from regions far beyond Cairo, perhaps India, or even as far away as Southeast Asia. And this vendor wouldn't just be selling spices. He'd be telling stories, sharing his experiences of the places these spices came from. Customers wouldn't merely purchase a handful of spices. They would purchase a story, a piece of the distant lands from which those spices were sourced. Historians still argue whether such personal interactions between vendors and customers were the core reason for the thriving nature of markets in Cairo, or if it was the sheer volume of goods that played a bigger role. While some claim the economic structure was solely dependent on the goods themselves, others suggest that the relationships vendors built with regular customers were the true force behind Cairo's prosperity. For many, the familiarity and personal connection they had with vendors made them more likely to return, creating loyal customers who would return time and time again for both goods and company. And then there were the customers themselves, some seasoned traders, some just everyday folk from all walks of life, seeking a better price, a unique item, or simply a slice of the world beyond their own neighborhoods. The streets were filled with people bargaining, negotiating, or just spending time wandering. In these moments, the marketplace was more than a place of commerce. It was a place of community, a space where people could come together, engage with one another, and build relationships outside of their usual social circles. Imagine the friendly banter that would occur. Customers arguing over prices, vendors laughing and offering little extras, like a handful of figs or a free handful of spices, all in the spirit of making a sale. It was a casual, almost familial atmosphere that permeated the space. But not every transaction in Cairo's marketplace was a simple exchange of goods for money. The social aspects of buying and selling in the 12th century marketplace were equally important. People didn't just come for goods, they came for news, for gossip, for connection. The market was a place where people shared news from their neighborhoods, from distant lands, and sometimes simply enjoyed each other's company. This vibrant, buzzing energy, mixing economic transactions with social interactions, made the market the heart of Cairo's day-to-day life. It's also worth noting that the vendor-customer relationship was often shaped by cultural norms. Cairo's social structure, like many places in medieval times, was a complex web of hierarchy and status. Even in the marketplace, social distinctions remained visible. The wealthy merchants who frequented the market would have expected to receive a different level of service than an average customer. Vendors, adept in the art of bargaining, would cater to this, offering preferential treatment or, perhaps, simply displaying the finer goods for the wealthier customers. The differentiation wasn't just economic, it was also social, shaped by one's status in the broader society. However, it's important to note that many of the vendors themselves were part of the lower social classes, working hard to make a living, often through long hours in the market. Some might have even been recent immigrants or former slaves, carving out their own livelihoods in Cairo's bustling streets. For the more affluent customers, though, it wasn't just about the goods they were buying. They were also buying status, reputation, and luxury. A beautifully woven silk scarf or a piece of fine jewelry bought in the marketplace would elevate their social standing, even more so if the item came with an exotic backstory from distant lands. Merchants who sold luxury goods in Cairo's markets would not only deal in the exchange of material items, but in the selling of an image, one of opulence, sophistication, and an extensive network of connections. Historians still argue about the extent to which the elite of Cairo interacted with the marketplace. Some believe that the upper class maintained a certain distance from the everyday vendors, opting for more private forms of trade, possibly through personal contacts or at private sales. Others, however, argue that even the wealthiest patrons could often be seen in the marketplace, enjoying the vibrancy of the scene, finding new goods, and participating in the exchange of culture. Regardless of which version is true, one thing is certain: the marketplace was an essential part of Cairo's social fabric, where class boundaries were often blurred by shared experiences and mutual dependence. Now, as you imagine this world of busy bargaining, laughter, and the clinking of coins, take a moment to reflect on just how much of the marketplace relied on these personal relationships. It wasn't just about goods or trade, it was about people, cultures, and the stories exchanged. In these simple, everyday interactions, the marketplace became more than just a commercial hub. It became a space where Cairo's soul was reflected, its energy flowing from one vendor to the next, and from one customer to another. As we delve deeper into the vibrancy of Cairo's marketplace, let's take a closer look at the goods that were perhaps most central to everyday life, the food. Street vendors in Cairo's bustling marketplace were primarily known for providing sustenance to the working class. Whether you were a merchant haggling for a deal or a laborer taking a break from a hard day's work, food was essential, and Cairo's vendors knew how to feed the masses. But let's not think of this just as simple transactions. Food in Cairo was far more than a necessity. It was a cultural expression, a reflection of the city's diversity, and a means of social interaction. Every bite of bread, every sip of water, every savory meat or sweet pastry was tied to a larger narrative of global trade, cultural exchange, and the daily rituals of Cairo's people. The most ubiquitous of all Cairo's street foods was, of course, bread. Freshly baked, soft inside with a crusty, golden brown exterior, bread was everywhere. As you wander through the market, you can almost smell the yeast rising from the baker's ovens as you approach a vendor's stall. The bread wasn't just sold in loaves, but also in flatbreads and smaller round pieces, perfect for dipping or for wrapping around meat and vegetables. The variety was astonishing. Some were baked with sesame seeds, while others were filled with cheese or olives, making them a quick, satisfying snack for the busy people of Cairo. Bread was such an integral part of the daily life in Cairo that historians argue it became the foundation of the entire city's food culture. The working class, for example, depended on it for sustenance, as it was cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. Many families in Cairo would eat bread with every meal, sometimes paired with vegetables, and at other times with meat or fish. Bread wasn't just food, it was a symbol of the city's resilience, its ability to provide for the masses. Next, let's talk about the vast variety of other street foods that filled the market. For those who wanted something a little more substantial, the meat vendors offered a wide range of options. Grilled meats, such as lamb, chicken, and beef, sizzling over open flames were a common sight in the marketplace. These street vendors would roast skewers of meat on portable grills, seasoning them with spices like cumin, coriander, and garlic. You could smell the mouth-watering aroma of grilling meat long before you saw the vendor. The meat was often served on pita bread or flatbreads, drizzled with tangy sauces or garnished with fresh herbs. Historians have often debated whether this meat-heavy street food culture was exclusive to Cairo or whether it was a broader phenomenon across the Islamic world during the 12th century. While it's widely known that the city's wealthy merchants enjoyed meat regularly, scholars suggest that this type of street food also became a popular option for the middle and lower classes who couldn't always afford a full meal of meat at home. It was the accessibility of street food vendors that allowed meat to become part of everyday life in the city. For many people, these vendors were their main access to a hearty meal after a long day's work. But not everything sold in Cairo's market was savory. You'd also find an array of sweets, pastries, and desserts that were just as vital to the food culture. Imagine, for a moment, walking past a vendor whose stall was filled with tempting desserts, sweet pastries filled with nuts and honey, date cakes, and even delicate sugar confections. It's hard to overstate the importance of these treats in Cairo's streets. They weren't just desserts, they were small luxuries. Sweets were served during festivals and special occasions, and for many, they represented a taste of indulgence in an otherwise hard-working, often grueling life. One of the most popular sweets at the time was a pastry called baklava, made of layers of phyllo dough, butter, and honey, with nuts or dried fruit in the center. Picture yourself savoring one of these delicate, crispy, yet sweet bites, the honey coating your fingers, and the satisfying crunch of nuts inside. While baklava is often associated with the Ottoman Empire, it's believed that versions of this dessert existed in Cairo long before the empire's rise. Thanks to the city's strong cultural and trade ties with the rest of the Mediterranean world, the sweet, flaky pastries served in Cairo's market reflected the city's rich history of cultural exchange, blending flavors from across the globe. Now, think about the drinks vendors, refreshing coolers of sweet, flavored water. These were perfect for the hot afternoons in Cairo, where the sun beat down relentlessly. You could find vendors selling cool drinks of sugarcane juice, flavored with citrus or rose water, served ice-cold from large clay jars. The sugarcane juice, a natural sweetener, was not only refreshing but also packed with energy, making it the perfect antidote to a long, hot day of walking through the marketplace. Another important drink sold by street vendors in Cairo was a simple yet beloved beverage called kahwa, coffee. Yes, Cairo's streets were already buzzing with the aromatic smell of coffee during the 12th century, thanks to the city's active involvement in the coffee trade. Imagine sitting down with a cup of warm, thick coffee made from freshly ground beans. Coffee houses and street vendors alike brewed up this delightful drink, which was not just a beverage but also an important social ritual. Gathering for a cup of coffee was an opportunity to chat, share news, and enjoy the company of friends and strangers alike. While coffee culture hadn't yet reached the heights it would in later centuries, it had already made its mark in Cairo's streets as a social connector. Looking at these street food traditions, it's easy to see how Cairo's market was not just a place for commerce. It was a cultural space where the act of buying food was part of a larger experience. Vendors didn't just sell goods, they shared stories, offered hospitality, and helped create a sense of belonging in an ever-changing city. This shared culture of food and drink made the streets of Cairo a place where people could connect, relax, and, most importantly, thrive in a world that was constantly shifting. Now that we've immersed ourselves in the vibrant flavors and bustling trade of Cairo's marketplace, it's time to step back and appreciate the deeper economic and cultural significance of the street vendors. They were not just individual traders selling goods to the highest bidder. They were integral parts of a far-reaching economic system, connecting Cairo to the larger world through trade routes that spanned continents. The street vendors of Cairo were key players in the global exchange of goods and ideas, and their marketplaces acted as the central nodes in the vast network that kept the city thriving. The world of 12th century Cairo was far more interconnected than one might imagine. Merchants and vendors sold goods that came from distant lands, fabrics from India, spices from Indonesia, glass from Venice, and leather from North Africa. This network of trade didn't just involve the exchange of material goods, though. Ideas, art, and culture flowed through the same routes. Cairo's markets were as much about cultural exchange as they were about commerce. As you wandered through the market, you were not just buying bread or spices. You were absorbing the influences of diverse cultures, experiencing firsthand the constant flow of people and ideas from across the Islamic world, Africa, and Europe. This global nature of trade was critical to Cairo's economy. Cairo, as the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate, was strategically positioned on the trade routes between Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. It was a city that thrived on the exchange of goods, whether luxury items like silks and perfumes or everyday necessities like bread and spices. The street vendors, in a very real sense, were the backbone of this system. Without them, the goods that passed through Cairo's grand bazaars, like the famous Khan el-Khalili market, would never have reached the homes, shops, and businesses of the common folk. These vendors were the ones who made global trade accessible to the average citizen. Let's take a closer look at how this interconnected system worked. Vendors in Cairo were part of a large-scale, organized system of trade that extended well beyond the city's walls. Goods flowed in from the east, carried by caravans that traveled the long desert routes, bringing in spices, fabrics, and rare items. Ships docked in Cairo's harbors, unloading precious cargo from as far as India, Persia, and the distant shores of Europe. These goods were then distributed to street vendors, who would bring them directly to the people of Cairo, selling them in the market. This system ensured that even everyday Egyptians had access to the finest goods, giving them a sense of connection to the broader world. But there was a darker side to this bustling trade, one that didn't always involve the exchange of goods, but of human lives. As Cairo was a major center of commerce, it also played a role in the slave trade. Slaves, many of whom were brought from sub-Saharan Africa, were a commodity in the marketplace as well. They were often sold in specialized markets, where traders would set up stalls and display their human merchandise just like any other product. The slaves would be bought and sold for various purposes, some for domestic service, others for labor in the workshops, and some even for military service. It's a sobering reminder that, while Cairo's market was a hub of trade and culture, it was also a place where some of the darker aspects of the medieval world were on display. But amidst this complex web of commerce and cultural exchange, the vendors remained central. They didn't just play a part in the economic system, they were also the people who connected the broader world to everyday life in Cairo. They were, in a way, the human face of this global trade. By selling imported goods to locals, by offering a space for social interaction, and by providing an essential service, the vendors of Cairo ensured that the marketplace remained a place of vibrancy and connection. The streets, lined with vendors calling out their wares, were not just about goods. They were about human interaction, the exchange of ideas, and the subtle balance between commerce and culture. The role of the street vendor in Cairo's economy can also be seen through the lens of innovation. As vendors found ways to stand out in the crowded market, they didn't just rely on the goods they sold. They innovated in how they sold them. One example would be the use of clever displays or packaging, which helped make products more attractive to buyers. A spice merchant, for instance, might place his most exotic and expensive items on display in the most eye-catching way, using bright fabrics or woven baskets to draw attention. Meanwhile, food vendors would often prepare their meals right on site, allowing customers to see the process and smell the aromas that came from grilling, baking, or frying. This sensory experience was part of the charm of Cairo's market. It wasn't just about what you bought. It was about the experience of being there, engaging with the vendor, and seeing the goods in the making. But innovation didn't stop at the way things were sold. Vendors in Cairo also had to be adaptable in their approach to business. If a particular spice or type of fabric wasn't selling well, a vendor might adjust their prices or even shift their focus to something else. For example, if a shortage of one type of cloth occurred due to trade disruptions, a fabric vendor might adapt by selling a different type of material that was more readily available. This adaptability was crucial for surviving the competitive marketplace, where the arrival of new goods or the disruption of trade routes could throw everything into chaos. Historians still debate whether such market innovations were unique to Cairo or if they were common in other trading hubs of the medieval world. Some suggest that Cairo, as one of the leading cultural and commercial centers of the medieval world, was particularly advanced in terms of its market organization. Others argue that the same principles could be found in other trade cities across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Regardless, what's clear is that the street vendors of Cairo were not just simple traders. They were integral parts of a dynamic and innovative system that kept the city at the center of the medieval world. And so, as we continue to explore the world of the Cairo marketplace, we realize that the street vendors were more than just purveyors of goods. They were the lifeblood of the city, connecting the ancient world's far-flung corners through trade, culture, and social interaction. Without them, Cairo's marketplaces would not have thrived, and the city would not have been the vibrant cultural hub it was. Through their resilience, adaptability, and ability to innovate, the street vendors of Cairo ensured that the city's markets would remain vital centers of commerce, culture, and connection for generations to come. As we continue to explore the bustling streets of Cairo, we find ourselves asking, what made this marketplace so unique in the larger context of medieval trade hubs? While many cities around the Mediterranean and beyond thrived on commerce, Cairo's markets stood out for one significant reason: they were a reflection of a dynamic, multifaceted society. They weren't just a space for buying and selling, they were a space for creating connections. They served as a reflection of the larger world in miniature. The intricate web of relationships between vendors, customers, and even rival merchants was what truly made Cairo's marketplace a living, breathing entity. As you imagine the vast array of people who came to the market, it becomes clear that it wasn't only the everyday people or the traders who were drawn to Cairo's bustling streets. Scholars, poets, travelers, and even royalty often wandered through the market, absorbing the culture, buying the goods, and observing the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Think about it. You might pass a merchant selling an intricate Persian rug, only to have a scholar from the universities of Baghdad haggling over the price. A poet might stop at a stall offering finely crafted glassware, contemplating how to weave such beauty into his next piece. This exchange of culture, intellect, and goods was a fundamental aspect of Cairo's market. And it wasn't just about the products, it was about the conversations that took place in these stalls, the ideas shared, the poems read aloud. The marketplace acted as a crossroads for all kinds of interaction, drawing people not only for the goods but for the social experience that came with them. One of the central features of the Cairo marketplace was its connection to the rest of the Islamic world. Cairo, as the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate, was a beacon of Islamic culture and trade. Merchants traveled from all parts of the Muslim world to bring their wares to the city. But beyond the Islamic world, the marketplace was also a meeting point for Christians, Jews, and other religious groups. This was a place where different cultures and religious backgrounds intersected, and where diverse ideas could mix. The vendors, with their sharp trading skills, didn't just deal in products, they dealt in ideas. Cairo's marketplace was a melting pot where religion, culture, and commerce intertwined seamlessly. As you continue to wander through the market, you might notice the small groups of intellectuals talking amongst themselves about the latest philosophy or theology. Historians still debate how much of this intellectual exchange was fueled by the marketplace atmosphere. Some argue that it was in the busy streets, away from the formal structures of the city, that much of Cairo's intellectual life truly thrived. The presence of intellectuals in the market, many of them in search of books, tools, or simple social engagement, shows that the marketplace wasn't just a space for material goods, but also for the exchange of ideas. Perhaps a philosopher might purchase a rare manuscript from a traveling scribe, or a mathematician might barter a piece of knowledge for an exotic spice. These intellectual exchanges were part of what made Cairo's market unique. But, of course, no marketplace would be complete without its share of gossip, rumors, and bustling human interaction. Imagine overhearing the latest tidbits of information as you stroll through the crowds. The news spreads quickly in such a crowded space, and vendors often served as the carriers of gossip. Whether it was about royal decrees, political shifts, or news from distant lands, the market was alive with conversation. It wasn't just about commerce, it was about being plugged into the pulse of the city and the world around you. For the vendors, these conversations were an essential part of their work. They were not only traders of goods, but also purveyors of the latest news, making them central figures in the flow of information. And let's not forget the entertainment aspect of the marketplace. While many might think of the marketplace as a strictly commercial space, it was also a place of leisure. Musicians, poets, and street performers would often set up in the market, offering their entertainment in exchange for a bit of coin. Their performances, whether they were playing instruments, reciting poetry, or telling stories, added a layer of richness to the atmosphere. These performers, often with their own unique skills and styles, became a cherished part of the market. They weren't just entertaining, They were adding to the cultural fabric of the space, enriching the experience for those who came to shop or simply pass the time. You might also notice the colorful characters who added to the market's energy. Imagine a merchant from the north of Africa, decked out in exotic clothing, his goods wrapped in fine linens, standing beside a local vendor selling fruits. The interplay of culture, social standing, and even race created a vibrant, multifaceted world within the market. The social interactions that took place among the vendors and their customers, the mix of classes, the casual interactions across cultural lines. These were the subtle things that made Cairo's marketplace a living organism. It wasn't just the goods or the transactions. It was about the relationships formed, the stories shared, and the sense of community that flourished among these individuals. Historians still debate whether the Cairo marketplace represented a utopia of social integration or whether it simply hid the deeper tensions of a complex society. While the bustling atmosphere may have created an illusion of harmony, there were still tensions beneath the surface, economic disparities, competition among vendors, and religious and political divisions that shaped the lives of those who lived in the city. However, despite these tensions, the marketplace remained a powerful force for social mobility and community engagement. It was here that people from all walks of life, whether rich or poor, noble or commoner, came together in a space that was unique to Cairo, where commerce and culture collided. As we reflect on the complexity of Cairo's marketplace, we realize that its significance went far beyond the material goods sold. The market was a space where people came together, not just for business, but for social, intellectual, and cultural exchange. It was a place where people engaged with the larger world, sharing stories, ideas, and experiences. The street vendors, through their daily work and relationships, were at the center of this exchange. They were not just selling products, they were selling pieces of the world, ideas, cultures, and connections that define the vibrant spirit of Cairo. As we continue to explore the layers of Cairo's 12th century market, we see that the street vendors were not just figures of commerce, but also cultural ambassadors. While many of them sold goods to sustain daily life, they also played an important role in the transmission of knowledge, traditions, and ideas. This wasn't just about selling bread or spices, it was about connecting the people of Cairo to the wider world. From the silk and cotton of the East to the intricacies of Islamic calligraphy, the vendors represented a unique window into the cultural melting pot that Cairo had become. Let's focus for a moment on one of the most iconic figures of the market, the book vendor. While books were not as widely available in the 12th century as they are today, Cairo's markets were home to a significant number of traders who dealt in manuscripts, scrolls, and written texts. This is the period when the great libraries of Cairo were at their peak, and intellectual life was flourishing. The markets, too, became a focal point for knowledge exchange. Imagine walking through the marketplace and stumbling upon a book vendor whose stall was piled high with rare manuscripts. You may have heard that he was the one to go to if you wanted to find texts from faraway lands, whether from Persia, Andalusia, or even the distant reaches of India. The book vendors weren't just selling books. They were selling the intellectual currents of the time. These texts could range from the works of classical philosophers like Aristotle, whose teachings had made their way into the Islamic world, to religious texts from various traditions. But beyond these, there were also works of poetry, astronomy, medicine, and even alchemy. Many of these texts were written by scholars who had spent years, sometimes decades, working to preserve knowledge from antiquity. In many ways, Cairo's market became a space where ancient knowledge was still very much alive and evolving. Historians still debate the level of literacy among Cairo's general populace during this period. Some scholars argue that the rise of Islamic scholarship, with its emphasis on both religious and scientific learning, led to a high rate of literacy, particularly among the elite and the intellectual classes. Others believe that literacy remained largely confined to scholars, religious leaders, and merchants who needed to read and write for their trade. But regardless of the exact numbers, it's clear that the market was a place where knowledge was exchanged freely, both in written form and through verbal communication. Street vendors, in their role as intermediaries between cultures, would often provide access to these ideas, not just in the form of books, but also through discussions and informal lessons. In many ways, the street vendors of Cairo were intellectual gatekeepers, facilitating the flow of ideas in ways that weren't immediately obvious. While they may not have been recognized as scholars or philosophers, their role in disseminating knowledge and making it accessible to everyday people cannot be overstated. Imagine a vendor selling medicinal herbs, for example. Sure, she's offering products that will help her customers feel better, but she's also passing on the wisdom of ancient remedies that have been passed down from generation to generation, and sometimes even from other parts of the world. This exchange of knowledge wasn't limited to written texts. It happened through conversation, through the small advice offered by the street vendors as they sold their wares. Even the vendors who specialized in food contributed to this cultural exchange. The spices they sold, cumin, saffron, turmeric, weren't just ingredients for cooking. They were part of the larger story of trade, migration, and the blending of cultures. The recipes that required these spices were influenced by trade routes stretching from India to Morocco, from the Far East to Europe. The vendors didn't just offer spices, they offered the very flavors of the world. They connected the people of Cairo with distant lands, making their culinary traditions accessible, allowing customers to taste a bit of the world in the food they ate. Think about the cultural richness in that sense. Street vendors were not only part of the city's economy, they were an essential part of its cultural fabric. They weren't just sellers, they were keepers of traditions, carriers of stories, and facilitators of cultural exchange. The marketplace was the perfect space for this kind of work, where people came together, not just to buy and sell, but to share ideas, experiences, and culture. And it was through these everyday interactions, whether over the price of a loaf of bread or the quality of a newly arrived piece of cloth, that the rich cultural life of Cairo flourished. One particular example is how the street food vendors contributed to the spread of culinary ideas. The 12th century saw an increasing integration of food from many different parts of the world, and the influence of foreign dishes in Cairo's markets was profound. From the delicious kebabs made with a variety of meats, often prepared with spices and seasonings that had traveled long distances, to pastries made with honey and nuts, there was no shortage of culinary variety. And it wasn't just food from other Islamic regions. There was also the influence of Christian, Jewish, and even European culinary traditions making their way into the Egyptian food scene. Street vendors in Cairo were part of this melting pot, offering dishes that were at once ancient and new, familiar and foreign. It was the market's diversity that made the food scene in Cairo unique. It wasn't just about eating for sustenance. It was about experiencing the flavors of the world. Historians still argue whether the rise of food culture in the 12th century played a role in the development of the marketplace as a cultural center, or whether the marketplace simply reflected the existing cosmopolitanism of Cairo. What is clear, though, is that the street vendors helped weave together the fabric of the city's social, cultural, and economic life. They weren't just businessmen and women. They were custodians of the diverse, vibrant world that Cairo had become, and through their trade, they contributed to the city's identity as a crossroads of cultures, knowledge, and commerce. As we close our look at the vendors of Cairo, we begin to realize just how much they shaped the city's life. It wasn't just about their goods, it was about how they made these goods part of the daily experience, turning the marketplace into a place where culture, commerce, and community converged. These street vendors, with their goods, their stories, and their relationships, were the lifeblood of Cairo's market. Without them, the city wouldn't have been what it was, an intersection of cultures, knowledge, and trade, thriving at the crossroads of the medieval world. As we continue to explore Cairo's marketplace, let's focus now on one of the more fascinating aspects of the 12th century market, its role as a space for the exchange of not just goods, but also stories, ideas, and innovations. While much of the focus so far has been on the trade of physical objects, the market was also a dynamic center of intellectual and cultural exchange. It wasn't just a place where you could buy the finest spices or the most luxurious silks. It was also where the world came together, where new ideas were tested and spread, and where the latest trends in art, science, and literature took root. In a city like Cairo, which was one of the most important intellectual centers of the medieval world, it's no surprise that the marketplace became a central hub for the exchange of ideas. The intellectual culture of Cairo was alive and vibrant, with scholars from all parts of the Muslim world, as well as from Christian and Jewish communities, converging in the city's great libraries and universities. But it wasn't only within the formal institutions that ideas flourished. Cairo's streets and markets were also teeming with intellectual activity. While scholars sat in the great libraries, surrounded by manuscripts and scrolls, the vendors in the market were also keeping the flame of intellectual exchange alive in their own way. Imagine walking through the crowded alleyways, passing one vendor after another, and overhearing snippets of conversation. One merchant might be explaining the best way to weave a carpet to a young apprentice. Another might be sharing news of a new philosophical treatise that had arrived from Persia. And yet another might be discussing the latest advancements in medicine learned from scholars in Baghdad. The marketplace was a space where people from different walks of life could share ideas, debate, and exchange knowledge. It wasn't just a marketplace for goods, it was a marketplace for ideas. As you stroll further through the market, you'll notice that the vendors themselves weren't just traders, they were often knowledgeable in their fields. The herbalist vendor might know exactly which plants were needed for specific ailments. The spice merchant could speak at length about the origins and uses of his products, and the fabric vendor could tell you the history behind each piece of cloth, where it was woven, and the cultural significance it held. These vendors were not merely selling items, they were educators, informers, and storytellers. They carried the knowledge of their trade, their culture, and even the wider world, sharing it with anyone willing to listen. Historians still debate how much of this intellectual exchange in the marketplace was formalized or structured. Some suggest that it was largely informal, people simply conversing as they went about their daily routines, passing along the latest news, stories, or ideas. Others argue that the exchange of knowledge in the marketplace was much more deliberate, with vendors intentionally educating their customers about the goods they were selling, while simultaneously introducing them to new ideas. Either way, the marketplace played a critical role in keeping the intellectual and cultural pulse of Cairo alive and well. But the marketplace wasn't only about intellectual exchange. It was also a space for innovation. Cairo, as a major trade hub, was exposed to a wide variety of innovations, whether they were new artistic techniques, architectural styles, or even technological advances. Vendors in the market were often the first to adopt these innovations, incorporating them into their goods and practices. This was particularly true for artisans and craftsmen who were constantly looking for ways to improve their work and attract more customers. A fabric merchant might offer a new type of patterned silk, inspired by the latest designs from the courts of Andalusia. A ceramicist might begin selling glazed pottery from the Far East, a new style that had arrived via trade routes. The marketplace was a living testament to the constant evolution of Cairo's culture, a space where trends, innovations, and new ideas spread quickly, often as quickly as the goods themselves. One of the most significant innovations that began to spread through Cairo's marketplace during the 12th century was the development of new trade routes. As Cairo became increasingly important in the global trade network, new routes were established, connecting the city to even more distant lands. This meant that the goods available in the market expanded as well. The arrival of new goods led to a new level of creativity and experimentation in the marketplace. Imagine a fabric vendor suddenly offering the finest silks from China, or a jeweler selling precious stones from the Indian Ocean. The street vendors were the first to introduce these new goods to the masses, and in doing so, they helped shape the aesthetic and economic character of the city. And yet, with all this innovation and exchange, there was also a deep sense of tradition that defined the marketplace. While vendors were always looking to improve their offerings and stay ahead of the latest trends, they were also rooted in the traditions of Cairo's past. The craftsmanship involved in creating textiles, pottery, and food was deeply rooted in centuries-old techniques that had been passed down from one generation to the next. These traditions were a key part of the market's identity. It wasn't just about selling products, it was about maintaining and preserving the cultural heritage of Cairo. The market was a space where the old and the new coexisted, with new ideas constantly blending with age-old traditions to create something uniquely Cairo. Historians continue to debate the balance between innovation and tradition in medieval marketplaces like Cairo's. Some argue that the rapid pace of trade led to a constant wave of new ideas and goods, while others suggest that tradition was the real driving force in the marketplace, and that innovation only happened in fits and starts. Whatever the case, it's clear that the marketplace was a space where the tension between old and new played out every single day, and it was the vendors, with their adaptability and knowledge, who helped navigate that tension and ensure that both the past and the future could coexist. As we continue to explore Cairo's marketplace, we begin to realize that it wasn't just a space for the exchange of goods. It was a space where the city's culture, ideas, and innovations came together. It was a place where vendors, customers, and intellectuals could meet and exchange ideas, a place where old traditions were respected and new ideas flourished. It was a living, breathing part of Cairo, where the city's past, present, and future all converged in one space. As we wander further through the market, it's important to acknowledge the central role of the Nile River in shaping the world of Cairo's street vendors. The river wasn't just a geographical feature of the city, it was the lifeblood of the marketplace. The Nile, with its annual flooding, brought not only fertile soil to Egypt, but also an essential trade route, connecting Cairo to the Mediterranean, sub-Saharan Africa, and the wider Islamic world. For street vendors, this meant access to a vast array of goods from all corners of the known world. Think about the vendors selling fish and fresh produce. The Nile's bounty would have made its way into the market, either directly from the fishermen or through a network of middlemen who transported it from the river's banks. The fish were abundant and varied, from Nile perch to tilapia, all fresh and ready to be sold. These fish would have been prepared on site by street vendors, often grilled or fried, with spices from across the Muslim world. The smell of fish cooking on open grills was as integral to the market as the scent of freshly baked bread. As you move through the market, you can almost smell the tang of the river itself mingling with the spices, the herbs, and the sizzling meat. The Nile brought these foods to Cairo's streets, giving the vendors access to some of the freshest ingredients in the city. But the Nile did more than just provide food. It was also essential for trade. The river served as a transport route for goods, with boats moving up and down the Nile, bringing items from distant lands to Cairo. This was particularly important for vendors who specialized in rare and exotic goods, such as spices, silks, and ceramics. Imagine the busy docks along the Nile, with boats unloading their cargo. It wasn't just the goods that came from far away. It was the stories and traditions of those lands that flowed into the market along with them. As boats docked, the goods were carried to the market, where vendors eagerly awaited their arrival. This constant flow of goods and ideas made Cairo a truly cosmopolitan city, with the Nile as its primary artery. The river's importance to the marketplace can't be overstated. Not only did it facilitate the transport of goods, but it also allowed Cairo's vendors to reach distant customers. The river connected the city to Egypt's rural villages, where people would travel to sell their produce, animals, and crafts. Without the Nile, Cairo's marketplace would have been much less diverse, and many of the goods that vendors sold would have been much harder to come by. It's no surprise that the vendors' livelihoods were so deeply intertwined with the river's flow. Their connection to the Nile wasn't just economic, it was cultural and social. But the relationship between the Nile and Cairo's vendors wasn't always smooth sailing. The river, for all its bounty, could also bring devastation. The annual flooding of the Nile, while providing fertile soil for agriculture, could sometimes be unpredictable. A flood that was too mild could lead to crop shortages, while a flood that was too severe could destroy everything in its path. For street vendors, this unpredictability was a constant concern. If the river's floods were too low, there might be fewer fish in the market, and prices for the fish that were available would rise. On the other hand, if the floods were too high, access to trade routes could be blocked, and goods might not reach the vendors as quickly as they were accustomed to. This unpredictable cycle of the Nile was a reminder of how interconnected life in Cairo was to the river and how vulnerable the city's economy could be. Despite these challenges, the river remained an essential part of Cairo's identity. Its constant flow connected Cairo to the larger world, physically, economically, and culturally. The Nile was a living symbol of the city's reliance on trade and its deep connection to the land. The street vendors, who relied on the river for everything from fish to trade routes, understood this connection better than anyone. They worked in sync with the rhythms of the river, adjusting their businesses according to the changing tides of the Nile. The river was not just a source of livelihood, it was a constant reminder of the delicate balance between human endeavor and nature. Historians continue to explore the relationship between the Nile and Cairo's economy, debating how much the river truly shaped the daily lives of the vendors. Some argue that the river was, at times, the most important factor in determining the market's success or failure. Others suggest that it was simply a part of the larger network of trade that made Cairo so successful. Still, it's clear that the vendors who lived and worked near the Nile felt its presence every day, whether it was through the fish they sold, the goods they traded, or the stories they heard from travelers and traders who had journeyed up and down the river. Now, imagine standing at the edge of the river, watching the boats glide by, hearing the gentle lapping of the water, and smelling the earthy scent of the river's banks. The vendors nearby selling their goods, trading with customers who have arrived from the countryside or from distant lands, bringing with them stories of the wider world. The Nile is not just a body of water, it is a conduit of life, bringing people and goods together in a continuous cycle. The vendors, whether they sell food, textiles, or trinkets, are all part of this larger ecosystem, a system that depends on the river's constant flow. In this way, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the heart of Cairo's marketplace, its pulse, its lifeblood. The more we reflect on the role of the Nile in the lives of Cairo's street vendors, the more we realize just how deeply interconnected every aspect of life was to this great river. From the fish vendors who relied on the river's bounty to the traders who transported goods along its banks, the Nile shaped the market's very essence. And for the people of Cairo, the river was as vital as the air they breathed, a constant force that shaped their economy, their culture, and their way of life. As we stand in the heart of Cairo's bustling marketplace, it's impossible to ignore the importance of competition among vendors. Like any thriving market, Cairo's marketplace wasn't just a place where goods were exchanged. It was a competitive arena where each vendor, whether they sold bread, spices, textiles, or jewelry, had to outwit and outlast their rivals. The noise, the colorful displays, the sharp calls of the vendors, all of it created an atmosphere of constant movement, not just in terms of goods being traded, but also in the hustle and bustle of vendors trying to capture the attention of potential customers. Think about it. You're walking through the market, your eyes darting from stall to stall, taking in the variety of goods before you. A spice merchant is shouting out the health benefits of his saffron, while a fabric vendor enthusiastically explains the quality of his silks, which come from distant lands. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with the pungent spices in the air, and the sounds of clinking coins, haggling, and laughing fill the atmosphere. But, as you glance around, you can see that each vendor is looking for something more than just a sale. They're looking to outdo one another, to attract attention, and to prove that they have the best product, the best price, and the best service. This competition was essential to the marketplace's vibrancy. Vendors didn't just sell their goods, They engaged in an ongoing battle to stand out, to be noticed. This competition drove innovation, customer service, and product quality. For example, a bread vendor might try to distinguish themselves by offering unique loaves, perhaps adding honey or nuts to their bread to make it stand out from the rest. Meanwhile, a spice merchant might offer discounts or create special blends of spices to entice customers. This constant race to offer the best product, the most attractive pricing, and the most compelling sales pitch created a dynamic, ever-evolving marketplace. But while this competition helped drive the vibrancy of the market, it also created challenges. Vendors had to deal not only with competition from others in their field, but also with fluctuating demand, changes in supply, and the impact of unpredictable factors like the rivers flooding or shifts in trade routes. The market wasn't a guaranteed success for any vendor. It was a daily challenge, one that required vendors to be adaptable, to learn the ebb and flow of customer needs, and to find ways to remain relevant and profitable. Historians still debate how much competition shaped the market's success. Some believe that the market's competitive nature ensured that only the most skilled and innovative vendors survived. Others suggest that the constant pressure to perform led to unhealthy practices, such as cutting corners on quality or engaging in unethical business practices. What is clear, though, is that the competition in Cairo's marketplace created an environment where quality and ingenuity thrived. Vendors were continually striving to improve their products and services, and this led to a marketplace full of vibrant, diverse goods, all vying for attention. As you walk further through the market, you begin to notice the vendors who stand out from the crowd, those who have mastered the art of selling. They're the ones whose stalls are busiest, whose voices ring out above the others, and whose goods are displayed in the most eye-catching way. A vendor selling jewelry from the Far East might hang their pieces in the sunlight so that they catch the light, drawing in curious customers. A vendor selling fruits may have a beautifully arranged display of oranges, figs, and pomegranates, with each piece carefully chosen to make the entire stall look irresistible. These vendors know that presentation is just as important as the quality of the product. After all, in a market this crowded, a vendor has only a few seconds to catch a potential customer's eye. But this competition wasn't just about the goods, it was also about the interaction with the customer. The most successful vendors in Cairo were often those who mastered the art of communication. They knew how to engage with their customers, how to make them feel valued, and how to make them laugh or smile. The relationship between the vendor and customer was often as important as the goods being exchanged. A vendor might share a story about the origins of their goods, offer a free sample of their product, or engage in a little friendly banter to lower the pressure of bargaining. This wasn't just about business, it was about creating an experience. And in a market as competitive as Cairo's, those who could build these personal connections had a significant edge. In this world of intense competition, however, there were moments of collaboration, too. Vendors who specialized in complementary goods might collaborate to create bundled deals, offering their customers a package deal. A spice merchant and a bread vendor, for instance, might team up to offer a meal bundle, a loaf of fresh bread paired with a spice mix for stews. These collaborations helped vendors reach more customers and expanded their influence in the market. And then there were the rivalries, the good-natured, sometimes intense, rivalries between vendors. Picture the fabric vendors who had adjacent stalls. Each one was trying to outdo the other in terms of quality and price. The banter between them would be constant, each vendor calling out to the passing customers, trying to draw them in with a better deal or a more beautiful fabric. This rivalry, while competitive, was part of what made Cairo's marketplace such a lively, energetic place. The constant back and forth, the tension between competitors, kept the market dynamic and full of surprises. Historians still debate how much of this market competition was formalized. Some argue that there were informal rules that vendors adhered to, while others suggest that the market was a free-for-all where anything went. Regardless, one thing is certain: competition in Cairo's market fueled its growth and success. Vendors didn't just survive, they thrived, constantly improving, evolving, and innovating to meet the needs of their customers. As you reflect on the marketplace's competitive spirit, you begin to see that it wasn't just a place to buy and sell. It was a vibrant ecosystem, a space where creativity, ingenuity, and human connection all played out in real time. The vendors were at the heart of this, each one working tirelessly to carve out a space for themselves in the crowded, noisy, bustling marketplace. And through this constant dance of competition, collaboration, and innovation, Cairo's marketplace continued to be a living, breathing testament to the city's resilience and energy. As we walk through the vibrant streets of Cairo's marketplace, it's clear that the vendors were more than just simple traders. They were integral parts of the city's social fabric. These market stalls were far from being isolated islands of commerce. They were communal spaces where people from all walks of life met, exchanged stories, and formed relationships. The social dimension of the marketplace was as important as the trade itself. As you move from one vendor to another, take a moment to imagine the interactions that took place here, the laughter, the bargaining, and the human connections that defined Cairo's social life. In a marketplace as bustling as Cairo's, you'd find that the vendors were often more than just sellers. They were also social connectors. For many, the marketplace was where they got the latest news, learned about events happening across the city, and even heard about political changes or battles fought far away. While the elite of the city might be insulated in their homes or palaces, the vendors were often the eyes and ears of the city, sharing tidbits of information with anyone who would listen. The marketplace was alive with gossip. Stories passed from one customer to the next, sometimes with a good-natured laugh, sometimes with seriousness. Every vendor, whether selling vegetables or fine silk, was a storyteller in their own right, contributing to the larger narrative of the city. Imagine a fish vendor leaning over his stall, chatting with a customer about the day's catch, while in the background, another vendor discusses the latest royal decree. Behind the scenes of every transaction, there were layers of conversation that helped weave the social fabric of Cairo. These exchanges were as much a part of the market as the goods being sold. The vendors, through their interactions, built bonds with their customers, creating a sense of community that was vital to the life of the city. But what's particularly interesting is how these social exchanges were shaped by Cairo's diverse population. The marketplace wasn't just a place for Egyptians. It was a place where people from all corners of the Islamic world and beyond came together. Traders from Persia, merchants from India, and travelers from Africa all converged in Cairo's markets, bringing with them their own cultures, traditions, and ideas. The marketplace was a space where cultural exchange happened organically through the simple act of trade and interaction. The vendors, in their roles as intermediaries between the different cultures, were the ones who facilitated these exchanges. They were the conduits through which the world came together. This diversity of cultures and people added a layer of complexity to the social dynamics of the market. The vendors had to navigate not only economic transactions, but also cultural and social expectations. A vendor selling textiles might not only need to ensure the quality of their goods, but also understand the cultural significance of certain fabrics or patterns. Similarly, food vendors had to be aware of dietary preferences and cultural taboos, offering products that appealed to the different communities that frequented the market. For vendors in Cairo, their ability to understand the diverse needs and customs of their customers was crucial to their success. This cultural literacy helped them build strong relationships with a broad spectrum of customers, from locals to foreign traders. Historians still debate the exact social dynamics of Cairo's marketplace. Some argue that the market was primarily a place for the working class, while others suggest that it was an egalitarian space where people of all social strata could interact on equal footing. It's likely that both of these perspectives are true. The market was, after all, a place where the ordinary citizen could rub shoulders with wealthy merchants, intellectuals, and even members of the ruling class. The mix of social classes added to the energy of the marketplace, creating a unique environment where social hierarchies could be temporarily blurred. In these busy, chaotic streets, everyone had a role to play. But the social aspect of the market wasn't just about commerce, it was also about leisure and community. As the day wore on, the market began to take on a more relaxed atmosphere. After a long day of bargaining and selling, vendors and customers would often pause for a moment to enjoy some downtime. Picture a vendor sitting on a low stool, sharing a cup of sweet tea with a friend, while nearby, children play in the dusty streets. There was a sense of camaraderie in the market, a feeling that, despite the frenetic pace of trade, the people who lived and worked there were part of something larger, a community bound together by the daily rhythms of life. And let's not forget the role of women in this social landscape. While many of the vendors in Cairo's marketplace were men, women played an important role as well. Women often ran their own stalls, selling food, spices, textiles, and crafts. They were responsible for their own livelihoods and, in many cases, were key figures in their family's economic success. Despite the social restrictions placed on women in the medieval world, many found ways to navigate the marketplace, carving out spaces for themselves as entrepreneurs and traders. The women who ran stalls in the market were part of the community's social fabric, contributing not only to the economy, but to the social interactions that define the market. What's particularly fascinating about this social aspect of Cairo's marketplace is how it reflected the larger trends of medieval Islamic society. The city itself was a place of immense cultural and intellectual diversity. Cairo was a melting pot where scholars, traders, artisans, and laborers from all corners of the Islamic world and beyond could meet, exchange ideas, and create something new. The marketplace was the epicenter of this exchange, where ideas and stories passed between people of different cultures, languages, and backgrounds. It was a space where social norms were negotiated and redefined, where relationships were formed not only through commerce, but through the shared experiences of daily life. As we walk through the marketplace, it's clear that Cairo's street vendors were more than just traders. They were vital members of a community, bridging the gaps between different social, cultural, and intellectual worlds. They weren't just selling goods, they were fostering relationships, preserving traditions, and facilitating the exchange of ideas. In the busy streets of Cairo, commerce and culture were inextricably linked. The vendors were at the heart of this process, connecting the city to the wider world while keeping its social and cultural life alive and thriving. As we continue our journey through the crowded streets of Cairo, we begin to see how the marketplace played a larger role in the city's political and social structure. The vendors in Cairo's marketplace, though not rulers or political leaders, were integral to the political fabric of the city. Through their interactions with customers, their trade in goods, and their participation in the daily life of Cairo, these vendors contributed to the pulse of the city in ways that were both subtle and significant. Imagine standing in the heart of the marketplace, feeling the energy of the city around you. The vendors are busy at work, calling out to potential customers, offering their wares, negotiating deals. But amid this daily hustle, you might notice that the marketplace is more than just a space for buying and selling. It's also a space for political discourse. The vendors, like many people in Cairo, were constantly exposed to the ebb and flow of political events, both in the city and beyond. The market was not just a place to purchase bread or spices, it was a place to hear the latest news, gossip, and political developments. Throughout history, markets like Cairo's have been important spaces for the dissemination of information. The vendors, with their close ties to the everyday people of Cairo, were often the first to hear about changes in political leadership, shifts in the economy, or new policies implemented by the ruling class. And as the vendors passed along this information to their customers, the marketplace became a space where political opinions were formed, discussed, and debated. The market was, in a sense, a reflection of the political landscape of Cairo, where the voices of the common people could be heard and where news traveled quickly from one person to the next. The political role of the marketplace was especially important in Cairo, a city that had witnessed numerous shifts in power over the centuries. During the 12th century, Cairo was under the rule of the Fatimid Caliphate, but political power was always fluid. At times, political strife and upheaval would make their way into the marketplace, with news of revolts or military campaigns reaching the vendors and customers long before the official government announcements. In this way, the vendors were not just business people, they were also informants, helping to shape the public perception of political events. Historians still debate the exact extent to which the marketplace served as a space for political action and dissent. Some argue that the market was merely a place for the exchange of ideas, while others suggest that it was a hotbed for political discussion, where people from all walks of life could engage in debates that sometimes spilled over into the streets. What is clear, however, is that the vendors, in their daily work, were not just passive observers of political life, they were active participants in shaping the political discourse of the city. Their voices, while not always heard in the halls of power, were part of the larger conversation that defined the political landscape of Cairo. But the marketplace wasn't just a space for political exchange, it was also a place where the political structure of Cairo's society played out in real time. The vendors in Cairo's market were part of a complex social hierarchy, with some enjoying more privilege and power than others. The vendors who sold luxury goods, such as rare spices or fine silks, were often able to command higher prices and establish themselves as more influential figures in the market. Meanwhile, those selling essential goods, like bread and vegetables, were often considered lower in the social order. But even within this hierarchy, there was a fluidity. Vendors could rise in status if they were particularly successful, skilled at negotiating, or had access to rare goods. The marketplace, in this way, reflected the larger social structure of Cairo, where status was determined not just by wealth but also by skill, reputation, and the ability to connect with others. The role of women in the market was also a crucial aspect of the social and political landscape. While many of the larger and more profitable market stalls were run by men, women still played an essential role in Cairo's street economy. Women vendors could be found selling food, spices, and textiles, and their presence in the marketplace was vital to the overall functioning of the market. For women, the market wasn't just a place of business, it was also a place of social mobility. Many women in Cairo's 12th century market came from lower social classes, and for them, running a stall could provide a sense of independence and economic agency. However, this independence was also shaped by the social expectations of the time. Women vendors had to navigate a complex system of gender roles and expectations, and while they may have had some freedom in the marketplace, they were still subject to the larger societal structure. As you think about the political and social dynamics of the marketplace, you begin to see how the vendors and their customers were not isolated from the larger forces of power in Cairo. The marketplace was not just a neutral space, it was a reflection of the larger political, social, and economic forces that shaped the city. The vendors, as the faces of Cairo's economy, had a unique perspective on these forces. They were witnesses to the day-to-day effects of political decisions, from changes in trade laws to the imposition of taxes. They were also participants in the city's social structure, where their position in the market could influence their status in society. This relationship between the market and politics is something that we see echoed in many other trading cities throughout history. The marketplace, as a space of exchange, is often a place where political power is both exercised and contested. The vendors, who provide goods to the people, are key figures in this dynamic. While they may not have been the ones making the laws or running the city, they were the ones who felt the effects of those decisions most directly. In this way, the marketplace was not just an economic space, it was a political space, a space where power, influence, and ideas were constantly in flux. As we stand at the edge of the marketplace, watching the interactions between vendors and customers, we begin to understand just how much more this market was than just a place of commerce. It was a space where the pulse of Cairo's political and social life could be felt, where the exchange of goods was just as important as the exchange of ideas, and where power, in all its forms, was constantly being negotiated. As we delve deeper into the world of Cairo's 12th century marketplace, we start to see how the exchange of goods and ideas within the market was also connected to a larger web of global trade routes. The marketplace wasn't just a local hub, it was the meeting point of several key trade routes that connected Cairo to the Mediterranean, the Arabian Peninsula, sub-Saharan Africa, and even Asia. The bustling market streets, teeming with vendors and customers, were not isolated from the wider world. Instead, they were part of a complex, interconnected system that spanned continents and brought goods from distant lands right to the heart of Cairo. Cairo's position as a central hub in the Islamic world made it a strategic location for trade. The city was situated at the crossroads of major trade routes that connected Europe and Asia. Merchants from North Africa, the Levant, and the Arabian Peninsula would bring their goods to Cairo, while traders from Europe and Asia made their way to the city to acquire local products, such as fine fabrics, spices, and jewelry. The Nile River, which ran through the heart of the city, acted as a vital trade route that connected Cairo to Egypt's interior and to the Mediterranean Sea. As you walk through the marketplace, you can imagine the constant flow of goods moving through Cairo's streets. Goods would arrive by caravan, by boat, and by foot. You might see merchants arriving from the east with silks, porcelain, and spices from India and China. On the other hand, traders from Africa might bring ivory, gold, and exotic animals. The variety of goods was staggering. Each item carried its own story of faraway lands, long journeys, and the merchants who had brought them to Cairo. The marketplace was, in essence, a reflection of Cairo's place in this vast network of trade. It was not just a local market, it was the heart of an ancient global trading system that had been in place for centuries. The goods that passed through Cairo's marketplace were not only commodities, they were also carriers of culture. Each product brought with it the traditions, stories, and knowledge of the places from which it came. For example, the spices that wafted through the air were not just culinary delights. They were also remnants of ancient trade networks that connected the Indian subcontinent to the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. The textiles that lined the market stalls weren't just pieces of fabric, they were symbols of the complex weaving traditions of Persia, India, and Central Asia. Even the jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight told stories of ancient craftsmanship, passed down through generations from distant lands. The marketplace in Cairo wasn't just a place to buy and sell, it was a space where the world came together, where culture, commerce, and history intersected. However, with the rise of trade came challenges. Trade routes weren't always safe, and the movement of goods and people was often disrupted by political instability, warfare, and natural disasters. The constant flow of goods through Cairo's marketplace meant that the city was frequently at the mercy of larger geopolitical forces. When trade routes were interrupted, whether by war, natural disasters, or shifts in political power, it had a direct impact on the availability and cost of goods in the marketplace. The vendors and customers who relied on these goods faced uncertain times whenever there were disruptions in the global trade system. One such disruption occurred in the late 12th century, when political instability in the region began to affect Cairo's trade networks. The Crusades, which were ongoing at this time, created tensions between the Christian and Muslim worlds. While Cairo remained a thriving hub of trade and commerce, the Crusaders' presence in the Levant and their interference with Mediterranean trade routes posed a direct threat to Cairo's position as a global trade center. The city, however, remained resilient. Its position on the Nile and its strong trade connections with sub-Saharan Africa allowed it to maintain its status as a key center of commerce, despite the disruptions caused by the Crusades. But Cairo's marketplace didn't just rely on global trade, it was also shaped by local agricultural production. While the goods brought in from other parts of the world were essential, the marketplace would have been incomplete without the agricultural products that came from within Egypt itself. The fertile soil along the Nile River allowed Egypt to grow abundant crops, which were brought into the city by farmers and sold directly in the market. grains like wheat and barley, vegetables like onions and garlic, and fruits such as dates and figs were staples of Cairo's diet. The agricultural products grown along the Nile helped feed the growing population and ensured that the city's economy remained self-sustaining, even when external trade routes faced interruptions. The agricultural products of Egypt were also important commodities that found their way to markets beyond Cairo. For centuries, Egypt had been known for its wheat exports, and the Nile's annual floods ensured that there was always a surplus to sell. These crops would often be transported from Cairo to other parts of the Islamic world and even to Europe. The success of Egypt's agriculture, then, was not just a boon for the people of Cairo. It was a key factor in the city's role as an economic powerhouse. As we reflect on the global nature of Cairo's marketplace, it's clear that the city was more than just a local trading hub. It was part of a larger network that spanned continents and connected people, goods, and ideas from all over the world. The vendors who sold their goods in the market were not just businessmen and women. They were part of this complex web of global exchange. They were the ones who brought the world into Cairo, turning the market into a living representation of the interconnectedness of medieval trade. Historians still debate the exact nature of this global trade system in the 12th century. Some suggest that the system was highly organized, with traders and merchants relying on established routes and networks to ensure the steady flow of goods. Others argue that trade was more chaotic and fragmented, with independent vendors and merchants carving out their own paths in the market. What is clear, though, is that Cairo's marketplace was at the heart of this system, connecting the various trade routes that span the Mediterranean, Asia, and Africa. The vendors, in their daily work, ensured that goods continued to flow, that cultures continued to mix, and that the city remained a central point in the medieval world's web of commerce. As you think about the interconnectedness of the marketplace, it becomes clear that Cairo was not just a city, it was the center of a dynamic, global network. The vendors, the customers, and the goods that passed through the marketplace were all part of something much larger, a story of trade, culture, and resilience that spanned continents and generations. As we reflect on Cairo's thriving marketplace, we start to realize that, much like any great city, its market wasn't just a space for commerce. It was also a hub for social interaction and community building. It's easy to think of the marketplace as a transactional space where goods are exchanged for money, but it was much more than that. It was a place where relationships were built, stories were exchanged, and social networks were created. In this vibrant atmosphere, the vendors played an essential role not only as traders, but also as community figures. They were often the ones who facilitated the social life of the market, guiding the ebb and flow of conversations, friendships, and alliances. Picture yourself walking down the busy lanes of the marketplace, your senses overloaded by the variety of smells, colors, and sounds. As you pass a vendor selling freshly baked bread, they wave you over, offering a free sample of their latest batch. You stop for a moment to chat with them, exchanging pleasantries. The vendor asks how your day is going, and you ask about the latest batch of olives they've brought in from the Mediterranean. This friendly exchange is common in the market. The vendors weren't just selling products, they were also part of the community fabric, fostering social connections with their customers. These relationships were built on more than just the transaction of goods. They were about establishing trust, building a sense of camaraderie, and being an integral part of daily life in Cairo. For many customers, especially those who came to the marketplace regularly, the vendor wasn't just a stranger behind a stall. They were a friend, an advisor, or even a confidant. If you were a regular customer at a particular spice stall, for example, you might find yourself chatting with the vendor about the latest gossip, news from distant lands, or even personal matters. The market was a place where people could get to know each other, share stories, and feel part of something larger than themselves. In this sense, the marketplace wasn't just a space of commerce, it was a social arena where bonds were formed, and the social fabric of Cairo was strengthened. But, of course, Not all relationships in the market were based on friendly exchanges. Vendors often had to navigate the complexities of competition and rivalry. As we've seen earlier, the market was a competitive space where each vendor was trying to capture the attention of customers. This competition wasn't always friendly. It could lead to tense moments and even outright conflicts. A vendor selling textiles might find themselves in competition with another stall just a few feet away, both trying to sell the same goods to the same customers. In these situations, the vendors had to use their wit, charm, and negotiation skills to win over customers. Rivalries between vendors were often a part of this competitive nature, but they also contributed to the vibrancy of the marketplace. In addition to these direct interactions, the marketplace was also a space for larger social dynamics. This was a place where different social classes came together, sometimes interacting and sometimes remaining separate. The elite of Cairo, with their wealth and status, might be seen walking through the market, accompanied by their servants, but they were often surrounded by the working class, the merchants, and the artisans who were the heart of the marketplace. The bustling crowds were made up of individuals from all walks of life, and the market itself became a space where these diverse groups could intersect. In some ways, the marketplace was one of the few places in Cairo where class distinctions were less rigid. A wealthy merchant might strike a deal with a humble bread vendor, or a scholar might chat with a spice seller about the latest developments in the world of mathematics. While Cairo was a city of great wealth and poverty, the marketplace was a space where, at least for a moment, these boundaries could blur. Historians continue to explore how class dynamics played out in Cairo's marketplace. Some argue that, while there was a certain level of interaction between classes, the marketplace remained largely divided along social lines. Others suggest that the marketplace was a space for relative equality, where even the poor could interact with the elite. Regardless of the exact nature of these interactions, what's clear is that the marketplace was a space where different groups came together, a microcosm of the larger social and political life of Cairo. In addition to the economic and social roles that vendors played, they also contributed to the cultural life of the city. Many vendors were not just traders, they were also artists, musicians, and entertainers. Picture a vendor selling delicate glass jewelry, their stall not only filled with beautiful wares, but also with the soft strains of music playing in the background. Perhaps a musician is performing nearby, and the vendor encourages you to stop and listen to the music while you shop. It wasn't uncommon for these vendors to blend the worlds of commerce and entertainment, offering not only goods, but also a cultural experience. These moments of cultural exchange were an important part of the market's atmosphere, enriching the lives of both vendors and customers. The influence of entertainment in the marketplace extended beyond music. Poets, storytellers, and performers also played a part in the social fabric of the market. It was common to hear the sounds of poetry readings or storytelling sessions in the market, as vendors and customers alike stopped to listen. This was a space where the arts were alive and thriving, and it was as much a place for cultural enrichment as it was for shopping. For many in Cairo, the marketplace wasn't just a space for buying and selling. It was a space where they could experience the richness of their culture and heritage. What we begin to understand through these layers of social interaction and competition is that the marketplace wasn't just a physical space, it was a living, breathing entity that was shaped by the people who inhabited it. From the vendors who shaped its character to the customers who walked its streets, the marketplace was a space where culture, commerce, and social connections merged. It was a place where human stories unfolded, where people from all walks of life came together, and where the pulse of Cairo could truly be felt. As we step back and observe the marketplace from a distance, we see that it's not just about the exchange of goods, it's about the exchange of ideas, culture, and relationships. The vendors weren't just part of an economic system. They were part of a larger social structure that shaped the city's cultural life. It was their interactions with customers, with fellow vendors, and with the larger community that made Cairo's marketplace such a vibrant, dynamic space. As we continue to immerse ourselves in the rhythms of Cairo's marketplace, it's time to reflect on a more complex aspect of the vendors' lives, the challenges they faced in maintaining their businesses and livelihoods. While the market was a place of vibrancy, trade, and social interaction, it wasn't without its difficulties. Vendors worked long hours, often from dawn until dusk, navigating the daily grind of buying, selling, and bargaining. The pressures were constant, ensuring they had enough stock, dealing with fluctuating prices, managing competition, and maintaining relationships with both suppliers and customers. In a bustling market like Cairo's, these vendors weren't just traders. They were resilient, adaptable entrepreneurs, constantly adjusting to the changing economic and social conditions around them. One of the major challenges vendors faced was the fluctuating prices of goods. The market was subject to the ebbs and flows of supply and demand, and vendors had little control over the price at which they could sell their wares. If a product was scarce due to poor harvests or trade disruptions, its price could soar, putting it out of reach for many customers. This meant that vendors had to constantly adapt, adjusting their prices accordingly while still keeping their customers satisfied. In some cases, vendors had to rely on the goodwill of their customers to make sales, offering discounts, providing added value, or even throwing in a small bonus to entice buyers. Consider the bread vendors, for example. Bread, being a staple food, was in constant demand, but its price was directly tied to the cost of flour. If the price of wheat rose, perhaps due to a bad harvest or fluctuations in global trade, the price of bread would rise with it. For vendors who relied on bread sales to sustain their families, these fluctuations were a source of anxiety. They had to carefully navigate these changes, managing their relationships with suppliers to ensure they could access wheat at a fair price while still offering affordable bread to their customers. The bread vendor, who sold something so simple, was actually at the mercy of a much larger and more complex global system. For vendors selling more exotic goods, like silks, spices, or rare perfumes, the challenges were even greater. These items came from distant lands, and their prices were subject to the vagaries of trade routes. A disruption in the flow of goods could lead to shortages, driving up prices and making it difficult for vendors to procure enough stock to meet demand. For example, if the trade route from India was interrupted by war or political instability, vendors might find themselves without the spices or fabrics that were so crucial to their business. In these cases, vendors had to be resourceful, relying on their networks and relationships with other traders to source alternative products or new suppliers. They couldn't afford to wait for things to return to normal. They had to find ways to keep their businesses afloat, regardless of the external pressures. And let's not forget the physical demands of being a street vendor. Cairo's market was a busy, bustling place, and vendors often had to spend hours standing in the sun, haggling with customers, and moving their stock. This wasn't just mentally exhausting, it was physically demanding. For the vendors selling food, there were also additional challenges when it came to food safety and hygiene. The conditions weren't always ideal for food preparation. Vendors had to contend with dust, flies, and the risk of spoilage in the heat. The vendors selling fish, meat, or fresh produce had to be especially vigilant, ensuring that their goods remained fresh and appealing to customers. The physical strain of these long hours, combined with the mental toll of running a business, made being a street vendor a tough, often grueling occupation. Yet, despite these challenges, the vendors continued to thrive. They did so through resilience, innovation, and a deep understanding of their market. Many vendors, in order to stay competitive, found ways to adapt to changing conditions. A spice vendor might diversify their offerings, introducing new blends of spices to keep customers coming back for more. A fabric merchant might start offering custom tailoring or repairs, giving their customers an added incentive to buy from them rather than their competitors. These small innovations, whether it was a new product, a creative marketing strategy, or improved customer service, were what allowed vendors to maintain their livelihoods in an ever-changing and competitive environment. While the daily grind of running a stall in the marketplace may have been exhausting, It also provided vendors with a certain amount of freedom. In contrast to the rigid hierarchy of wealth and power in the city, the marketplace offered a kind of flexibility. Vendors were their own bosses, with the ability to set their hours, negotiate their prices, and shape the way they interacted with customers. Of course, the marketplace had its own rules, dictated by the need to remain competitive and meet customer demands. But for many vendors, the rewards of independence and the potential for success outweighed the hardships of daily work. For the ambitious vendor, the market could be a place where hard work and perseverance led to success. Historians still argue about how much independence vendors truly had. Some suggest that vendors were often subject to the whims of the elite, who could exert considerable influence over market prices, while others believe that vendors, particularly those who were well established, had a significant amount of autonomy. What is clear, however, is that the marketplace was a space where vendors could carve out a living through their hard work and skill. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't guaranteed, but it offered an opportunity for those willing to put in the effort. Despite the challenges, the marketplace remained an integral part of Cairo's economy and culture. It was where people came together to trade, socialize, and engage in the shared rhythms of daily life. The vendors, through their determination, innovation, and adaptability, were the heart of this system, making sure that the market remained a vital space in Cairo. Their ability to weather the challenges they faced, whether it was fluctuating prices, supply shortages, or the physical toll of their work, was what allowed the marketplace to thrive and continue as a central fixture of Cairo's bustling life. As you imagine the vendors navigating these challenges, you begin to appreciate just how resilient they were. They weren't just traders, they were entrepreneurs, social connectors, and key figures in the complex ecosystem that was Cairo's marketplace. Despite the pressures, they kept the market alive, adapting, evolving, and surviving through their creativity and perseverance. As we continue through the marketplace, let's explore how vendors in 12th century Cairo not only faced the challenges of trade, competition, and the demands of daily life, but also contributed to the preservation and innovation of cultural traditions. The market was not only a space for economic transactions. It was a center for the continuation and evolution of cultural practices that had been passed down for centuries. Whether it was in the art of crafting goods, the preparation of food, or the telling of stories, the vendors in Cairo's marketplace were the bearers of a rich cultural heritage that reflected the city's position at the crossroads of diverse civilizations. Take, for instance, the artisans and craftsmen who sold their wares in the market. From metal workers to wood carvers, from potters to weavers, the vendors in Cairo's marketplace were also the keepers of ancient craft traditions. These crafts didn't just represent products, they were expressions of cultural identity, passed down from generation to generation. Imagine a vendor sitting beside his stall, carefully carving intricate patterns into a wooden chest or weaving a beautifully patterned rug, all while engaging in conversation with his customers. The skill and expertise required to create these items were rooted in centuries-old traditions, each one influenced by the rich cultural history of Egypt and the broader Islamic world. The continuity of these craft traditions was important not only for preserving Cairo's cultural identity, but also for ensuring that these skills were passed on to future generations. The vendors themselves were often mentors, teaching their craft to apprentices or family members who would continue the work after them. This intergenerational exchange ensured that the skills of artisans and craftsmen would not be lost, and as the market grew, these traditions became an integral part of Cairo's economic and social fabric. The marketplace was a space where the old met the new, where traditional methods of crafting goods blended with the evolving needs of a growing urban population. At the same time, the cultural significance of Cairo's marketplace wasn't limited to craftsmanship. It extended to the culinary traditions as well. Vendors selling food in the market didn't just provide sustenance. They also kept the culinary traditions of Egypt and the broader Islamic world alive. Food was an essential part of Cairo's cultural identity, and the marketplace was where the diverse flavors, ingredients, and cooking methods of the city came together. You could find vendors selling freshly baked flatbreads, roasted meats, fragrant stews, and sweet pastries, each dish representing a piece of the city's culinary history. But food in Cairo wasn't just about taste, it was also about tradition. Many of the recipes passed down from generation to generation had their roots in ancient Egyptian, Persian, and Arab cuisines. A simple dish of lentils and rice, for example, might be served with a side of yogurt and pickles, blending local Egyptian ingredients with influences from the Levant. Similarly, the sweets and pastries sold by vendors were often made using recipes that had been adapted from Persian and Byzantine traditions, reflecting the cultural melting pot that Cairo had become. For the vendors, food wasn't just a product, it was a way to preserve the culinary heritage of the city and share it with others. Even the drinks served in Cairo's markets had cultural significance. Coffee, which had been introduced to the city from Yemen, became a symbol of Cairo's growing connection to the wider Islamic world. Street vendors would sell coffee, often accompanied by a small sweet treat, providing customers with a moment of respite from the hustle and bustle of the market. Coffee houses, which began to emerge in Cairo during this period, became spaces where people could socialize, discuss politics, and engage in intellectual debates. These coffee houses, often located near the market, were integral to the social life of the city and played a role in the spread of knowledge and culture. In addition to the culinary and craft traditions, Cairo's market was also a place where oral traditions thrived. Storytellers, poets, and musicians played an important role in the market, entertaining customers with tales of ancient heroes, epic poems, and songs. These performers were an integral part of the market's cultural life, providing a sense of entertainment and connection to the past. They weren't just there to pass the time, they were continuing an ancient tradition of oral storytelling that had been a central part of Egyptian culture for millennia. The marketplace, in this sense, was a living museum where culture was passed on through performances, songs, and stories. The stories told in the market often reflected the experiences of everyday life in Cairo, but they also carried lessons about morality, virtue, and the human condition. The stories were a way to connect the present to the past, linking the lives of the people in the market to the ancient traditions of Egypt, Persia, and Greece. They were a way of passing on wisdom, of teaching lessons about life, and of reminding people of the values that had shaped the world they lived in. These oral traditions were a way for vendors and customers alike to engage with their cultural heritage, keeping the past alive and relevant in the present. And yet, despite the market's deep connection to tradition, it was also a place where innovation occurred. As we've seen in earlier sections, Cairo's vendors were constantly adapting to changes in demand, competition, and the availability of goods. They weren't just preserving tradition, they were also shaping the future of the market. The constant flow of goods from distant lands, the introduction of new ingredients and spices, and the cross-cultural exchange that occurred in the market all contributed to the development of new culinary techniques, artistic styles, and business practices. The vendors were not merely preserving the past, they were actively shaping the future. Historians still debate how much the market's preservation of cultural traditions shaped the social and political life of Cairo. Some suggest that the market played a vital role in maintaining the city's cultural identity, while others argue that the marketplace was simply a space where commerce and culture coexisted, but didn't necessarily influence each other. Regardless of the precise nature of this relationship, one thing is clear: the marketplace was a place where cultural traditions were both preserved and transformed. The vendors, in their daily work, ensured that the rich cultural heritage of Cairo remained alive, while also adapting to the needs and desires of a changing world. As we step back and reflect on the marketplace, we begin to appreciate just how complex and interconnected it was. The market wasn't just a place for trade, it was a space where culture, tradition, and innovation came together. It was a place where the people of Cairo could connect with their past, engage with the present, and shape the future. The vendors were the keepers of these traditions, passing them on to the next generation while also adapting to the demands of a constantly changing world. In this way, Cairo's marketplace was not just a commercial center. It was a cultural and social hub that helped define the city's identity. As we move deeper into the marketplace, it's impossible to overlook the role of the vendors in shaping the cultural and economic exchange that took place within the city of Cairo. The marketplace wasn't just a space for the exchange of goods, it was a key area for the broader civic life of the city. Vendors, in their everyday activities, were central to how Cairo functioned socially and politically, even though they may not have been the ones writing laws or sitting in courtrooms. Their impact, however, was still felt in powerful ways. One crucial element of the market's vibrancy was its role in encouraging a culture of innovation and social mobility. While Cairo's grand palaces and universities were places of academic study and aristocratic affairs, the marketplace was where ideas were tested in the real world. Vendors were often the ones experimenting with new business practices, trying out fresh techniques for making their goods, and even adapting the most current trends in fashion or cuisine. For example, we can imagine a vendor selling fruits deciding to add exotic spices to their offerings to attract the growing merchant class, or a fabric seller introducing new designs inspired by other parts of the world. These small innovations were just as critical as the academic advancements that took place in Cairo's famed institutions. Vendors not only provided the citizens of Cairo with the goods they needed, but also with an essential window into the rapidly changing world outside the city's walls. As trade routes expanded, new ideas, new philosophies, and even new religions came into Cairo from every direction, and it was in the marketplace that these ideas often first entered the collective consciousness of the people. It was the vendors, in their lively and often impromptu discussions, who acted as cultural conduits. Whether it was a vendor sharing news of a new philosophical work that had arrived from Baghdad, or a merchant talking about the latest political unrest in faraway Andalusia, these exchanges kept the people of Cairo in touch with the world beyond the city. The social dynamics of the marketplace were also critical to the city's larger economic system. The vendors played a key role in integrating various social groups into Cairo's bustling commercial life. While the city's upper classes might be insulated in their grand homes, the marketplace was where the elites rubbed elbows with the working class. It was a rare space where differences in wealth, status, and class were somewhat minimized. Everyone, from the poorest laborer to the wealthiest merchant, had a stake in the marketplace. Even real figures might wander through the market, sometimes incognito, to observe the day-to-day workings of their city. This level of social integration was a crucial part of Cairo's character. It allowed people to live and work side by side, fostering a sense of shared purpose and community despite the apparent divides in social status. And while the marketplace may have appeared to be a place of equal opportunity, it also reflected the broader social hierarchies in Cairo. Vendors who sold luxury goods or rare imports enjoyed a level of prestige not afforded to those selling everyday staples like bread or vegetables. But despite this, there was an underlying sense of competition, where every vendor had the opportunity to rise in status through hard work and a little creativity. This system, though not perfect, provided a kind of meritocracy within the marketplace. A successful vendor could elevate themselves not only in terms of wealth, but also in social prestige. A bread vendor who gained a reputation for baking the finest loaves might find themselves in the same circles as those who sold high-end goods or luxury items. The market was also a space where gender roles were both enforced and, in some cases, relaxed. While many of the larger and more profitable market stalls were run by men, women also played a significant role in the marketplace. Women were often in charge of smaller stalls, selling food, fabrics, or household goods. Many women were also engaged in the production of goods, whether they were weaving cloth, baking bread, or selling fruits and vegetables. Women played an important role in the city's economy, though they often did so within the confines of social expectations and limitations. Some women were able to achieve a great deal of independence through their work in the market, while others operated under the watchful eye of their male relatives. Despite these challenges, many women found ways to carve out spaces for themselves in the public sphere, utilizing their skills to support their families and, in some cases, even establish successful businesses. Beyond gender roles, there was another aspect of Cairo's marketplace that contributed to its liveliness: the role of family. Many vendors worked with their families, passing down their skills from one generation to the next. Whether it was a family of potters, who had been in the business for generations, or a family of bakers, the marketplace was often a family affair. This generational continuity ensured that the skills of Cairo's vendors were preserved and passed down, while also creating a sense of community and legacy within the market itself. The family unit was a key pillar in the success of many vendors. It wasn't just about individual enterprise, it was about ensuring that future generations could continue to thrive in the marketplace. Historians still argue about the extent to which women and families played a central role in the economy of medieval Cairo. Some believe that women's contributions, while significant, were often overlooked by contemporary sources. Others argue that the market was a space where women were able to carve out roles for themselves in a male-dominated world. Regardless of the specific details, it is clear that both women and families played essential roles in Cairo's thriving marketplace, contributing to the city's economic prosperity and cultural vibrancy. As we step back and observe the intricate web of relationships, gender roles, and family dynamics in Cairo's market, we begin to understand just how deeply woven into the city's social fabric the marketplace was. It wasn't just a place where goods were bought and sold. It was a space where people came together to exchange ideas, to forge relationships, and to contribute to the city's thriving culture. Whether through intellectual exchange, cultural innovation, or the daily grind of business, the vendors and customers of Cairo's marketplace played a crucial role in shaping the city's identity. As we continue our journey through Cairo's marketplace, it's essential to understand that the world of the street vendors wasn't just confined to the bustling city streets. Their influence spread far beyond the immediate vicinity of their stalls, touching every aspect of Cairo's life. The vendors, with their goods, their stories, and their customs, were an integral part of the city's broader cultural and economic systems. Their work was both a reflection of the city's diversity and a driver of the vibrant, multifaceted world that Cairo had become. Let's consider the ways in which the market operated on a deeper level. While it's easy to focus on the goods that vendors sold, we cannot forget the way in which they also shaped the social and political life of the city. Markets in Cairo were more than just places of business. They were a reflection of the values and priorities of society at large. The way people interacted with one another, the way goods were exchanged, and the stories that were told all contributed to the larger narrative of Cairo. It was through these market transactions that social and cultural norms were reinforced and sometimes even challenged. Think about the role of trade in the spread of ideas. While goods were the obvious products of exchange in Cairo's marketplace, ideas were equally as valuable. As goods traveled from distant lands, so too did the ideas, philosophies, and stories that accompanied them. Merchants and vendors, who were the lifeblood of the market, were also responsible for the flow of knowledge. They were the ones who carried stories of political changes, intellectual developments, and scientific discoveries to the streets of Cairo. Vendors were more than just purveyors of goods. They were messengers of news, creators of cultural ties, and holders of knowledge. A great example of this knowledge exchange can be found in the field of medicine. In Cairo's marketplace, vendors selling herbs, medicines, and potions weren't merely selling items for physical health, they were also selling the latest in medical knowledge. Many of these vendors were steeped in centuries of tradition when it came to herbal remedies, and they were often the first to introduce new techniques, remedies, and cures to the people of Cairo. The marketplace was alive with the exchange of medical wisdom, where a simple conversation with a vendor might introduce a customer to a new treatment or cure for an ailment. It was also through trade that Cairo's marketplace became a space where global intellectual movements took root. While Egypt was an intellectual powerhouse, drawing scholars from across the Muslim world, these ideas also spread outward through the marketplace. Consider the growing interest in astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy during the 12th century. Scholars would share their discoveries in the busy streets, and vendors, with their vast networks, would bring these ideas back to their stalls. The market, in this sense, was not just a commercial space, it was an intellectual exchange where the latest ideas in science, medicine, and philosophy were passed from one person to another, often without the need for formal institutions. One such idea that gained traction in the marketplace was the concept of trade ethics. As merchants became more sophisticated, the principles governing trade began to evolve. Vendors were not only concerned with making a profit, they were also concerned with maintaining the trust of their customers. In an environment where reputation mattered greatly, vendors knew that offering fair prices, ensuring the quality of their goods, and building relationships with their customers were crucial to long-term success. This evolving understanding of trade ethics helped shape the market's culture and contributed to the development of more sophisticated economic systems in Cairo. The social aspect of this exchange was equally important. Vendors were not just isolated individuals trying to sell their goods. They were part of larger networks that connected the people of Cairo to one another and to the wider world. These networks were built on trust, and much of the market's social and economic stability relied on the ability of vendors to maintain these relationships. This was a system that depended on mutual respect between vendors, customers, and even between competing merchants. A good reputation could make or break a vendor's business, and for that reason, vendors were often known for their honesty and integrity. These values helped to ensure the smooth functioning of the market and kept it a safe and reliable space for trade. However, despite the best efforts of the vendors, Cairo's marketplace was not immune to political and social unrest. Cairo, during the 12th century, was a city marked by change, political upheavals, shifts in ruling powers, and changing alliances all had their impact on the market. And yet, through it all, the marketplace remained a steady fixture in the lives of the people. In times of political instability, the vendors were often the ones who kept the pulse of the city beating. While the elite might have retreated to their palaces, the vendors and the people in the market continued their daily routines, providing essential goods, maintaining social ties, and keeping the city alive. Historians still debate the extent to which political power influenced the marketplace. Some argue that political instability led to periods of economic stagnation, with vendors unable to access goods or being forced to deal with higher taxes or tariffs. Others suggest that the market remained resilient, adapting to the shifting political landscape by diversifying the goods it sold or adjusting to changes in demand. Regardless, the marketplace was a reflection of Cairo's ability to endure, to adapt, and to thrive, even in the face of adversity. This adaptability was also evident in the ways in which the vendors responded to the growing influence of Islam. The 12th century was a period of significant cultural and religious change in Cairo, and many vendors adjusted their practices to align with Islamic values. Islamic law, or Sharia, played an important role in shaping the marketplace. It set ethical standards for trade, such as fair pricing and honesty in business dealings. Vendors were expected to adhere to these principles, and the marketplace became a place where these values were constantly tested and reinforced. For vendors, the market was not just a place for commerce, it was a space where their faith and their business intersected, creating a unique and dynamic environment. In the end, the marketplace in 12th century Cairo was not just a commercial hub, it was a cultural, intellectual, and social space where people from all walks of life came together. It was a place where goods, ideas, and relationships were exchanged, and where the challenges of daily life were met with resilience and adaptability. The vendors, with their deep connection to the pulse of Cairo, were not just the lifeblood of the market, they were the heart of the city itself. As we continue to explore the market, it's clear that Cairo's 12th century marketplace was not merely a hub of commerce, it was a reflection of the city's larger identity. The bustling streets, filled with vendors and customers from all walks of life, told the story of Cairo as a crossroads of cultures, a melting pot where goods, ideas, and people converged. But there's one aspect we haven't touched on yet that is as integral to the life of the market as the goods it offered: the marketplace's role in shaping the urban identity of Cairo. Cairo's market was a place where the city's urban landscape and its social structure were constantly evolving. The way the market was designed, the way vendors set up their stalls, and the interactions between different classes of people, each of these elements played a role in defining what Cairo was, both as a physical space and as a cultural entity. Imagine standing at the heart of the market, surrounded by a riot of color, sound, and movement. Every stall, every vendor, and every passerby is a piece of the puzzle that makes up Cairo's urban identity. The market was a living organism, constantly changing and adapting to the needs of the people it served. And as the city grew and developed, so too did the market, shaping the very way people in Cairo thought about themselves and their place in the world. One of the most striking aspects of the marketplace was its physical design. The market was a series of interconnected streets and alleys, with vendors setting up their stalls in specific areas based on the goods they sold. The layout of the market created a sense of flow, guiding customers from one section to the next. The narrower lanes, filled with the scent of spices and the hum of conversation, led to broader open spaces where larger goods, such as textiles and pottery, were displayed. As you moved through the marketplace, the physical layout mirrored the social and economic structure of Cairo itself. The bustling, crowded sections of the market were populated by vendors selling daily necessities, while the more spacious and open areas were reserved for the luxury goods that catered to the wealthier classes. This physical separation of goods based on their economic and social status was not only practical, it was also a reflection of Cairo's class divisions. In this sense, the market became a microcosm of the larger city, where different social groups could move through the space but rarely interacted in meaningful ways. The wealthy might frequent the more open, spacious sections of the market, where they could purchase fine fabrics, jewelry, and imported goods, while the working class would be more likely to visit the smaller, more crowded stalls, where the essentials of daily life were sold. The market, while full of interactions and exchanges, also reinforced the social and economic hierarchies that defined Cairo's urban life. However, despite these physical and social divisions, the market was also a space where people of different backgrounds, classes, and social statuses could interact. The very design of the market encouraged this interaction. The open layout of the market encouraged the mingling of different groups, creating opportunities for connections and exchanges that might not have occurred elsewhere in the city. The vendors, in particular, played a crucial role in bridging these divides, connecting the elite with the working class, and creating a space where cultural and economic exchanges could happen organically, whether it was through the goods they sold, the stories they told, or the conversations they had. The vendors helped to shape the market into a space where the complexities of Cairo's urban life were reflected and celebrated. The marketplace was also a space where political power was subtly exercised. While the city's rulers and elite were not directly involved in the day-to-day workings of the market, their influence was felt in more subtle ways. Taxes, regulations, and the policies of the Fatimid Caliphate all had an impact on the market, shaping the prices of goods, the availability of certain products, and the ways in which vendors conducted business. The rulers of Cairo used the market as a tool to reinforce their authority, ensuring that the flow of goods and people within the city was controlled and regulated. Vendors, in turn, had to navigate these regulations while still maintaining their businesses and keeping their customers happy. In this way, the marketplace became a space where political power was exercised not through direct control, but through the management of economic systems. In addition to the more formal exercises of power, the marketplace was also a place where politics could be discussed more freely. As we've seen before, the vendors and their customers were often the first to hear about political developments, whether it was a new royal decree or news from the front lines of battle. the marketplace became a space where people could voice their opinions, share their thoughts, and engage in political discourse. The vendors, in particular, were key figures in this process. They acted as mediators, passing on news, offering their opinions, and shaping public perception through their interactions with customers. This informal political exchange in the marketplace was an important part of Cairo's civic life, allowing people from all walks of life to participate in the larger conversations that shaped the city. Through all these social, political, and economic interactions, the marketplace helped shape Cairo's urban identity. It wasn't just a space for trade, it was a space where the city's values, social structures, and politics were negotiated and expressed. The marketplace reflected Cairo's diversity, its complexity, and its status as a center of commerce and culture in the medieval world. It was a space that was constantly evolving, adapting to the needs of the people it served, while also shaping the very fabric of Cairo's urban life. The vendors, through their work and their interactions with the people, played a crucial role in this process. They were not just traders, they were the architects of the marketplace, shaping the city's identity, one transaction at a time. As we step back and reflect on the marketplace's role in Cairo's identity, we begin to see that it was more than just a physical space. It was the beating heart of the city. It was where commerce and culture met, where politics and society intersected, and where the story of Cairo's urban life was written. Through the vendors' hard work, innovation, and resilience, the marketplace became a place that reflected the city's values and shaped its future. As we near the end of our journey through Cairo's 12th century marketplace, let's take a moment to reflect on how the legacy of these vibrant market streets continues to influence the modern world. While the physical market of Cairo may have evolved over the centuries, the spirit of what it represented, the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture, lives on in the marketplaces of today. The bustling, chaotic energy that defined the streets of Cairo continues to resonate in cities around the world, where marketplaces remain at the heart of urban life. Take a moment to think about the modern marketplaces you might know. Whether it's a local farmer's market, a flea market, or an open-air bazaar, these spaces, though vastly different from Cairo's medieval marketplace, still carry the same essential elements that define Cairo's vibrant trade. People from different walks of life come together to exchange goods, engage in conversation, and create a sense of community. The energy of the market is still palpable, as it was in Cairo, where the lines between commerce, culture, and community blurred. In fact, the modern idea of a marketplace can still be traced back to the historical precedent set by places like Cairo's 12th century market. In the past, vendors were not just sellers, they were integral to shaping the city's economy, culture, and social life. They created the foundation for the bustling social hubs that we recognize today. Whether it's the food trucks that line a city street or the artisanal shops that dominate a neighborhood, modern markets still represent the same exchange of ideas, goods, and stories. What's particularly fascinating is how the role of the vendor has evolved, but also stayed remarkably similar. Just as vendors in Cairo played a role in shaping the political, cultural, and intellectual currents of the city, today's vendors continue to influence the fabric of their local communities. For instance, many of today's street vendors are part of the growing trend of local, sustainable businesses. Just as the vendors of medieval Cairo sold goods that were imported from distant lands, modern vendors often sell locally sourced, handmade, and environmentally conscious products. These vendors contribute to the growing awareness of sustainability and community-driven commerce, continuing the legacy of the market as a place of cultural exchange and social mobility. The role of the vendor as a connector between different cultures and communities is another enduring aspect of the marketplace's legacy. In Cairo's market, vendors from all parts of the world brought their goods and stories with them, creating a space where cultural exchange could take place. Today, that same role continues, especially in multicultural cities around the world. Modern street markets in places like New York, London, or Marrakesh bring together people from diverse backgrounds, allowing them to connect, share, and celebrate their differences. The marketplace remains a space where people can come together, whether they're seeking food, clothing, or simply a sense of belonging. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Cairo's marketplace is the role it played in social mobility. In a society marked by rigid class divisions, the marketplace offered a chance for vendors to rise above their social status. Vendors could use their hard work, innovation, and relationships to build businesses, improve their lives, and create opportunities for future generations. This idea of social mobility, where anyone with enough perseverance and skill could rise in status, is still a core element of modern markets today. Whether you're a small business owner, an artisan, or a street food vendor, the marketplace continues to offer opportunities for people to carve out their own paths. Even in today's highly digitized world, we see echoes of Cairo's vibrant market culture in online platforms like eBay, Etsy, and local delivery services. While the market may no longer exist as a physical space in the same way it did in medieval Cairo, its digital descendants carry on the same traditions of trade, community, and cultural exchange. In these online spaces, vendors still serve as the bridge between buyers and goods, much like their predecessors in Cairo's marketplace. The internet, in a way, has expanded the very idea of the market into a global space, where cultural boundaries are crossed with a click, and goods from around the world are just a few keystrokes away. Moreover, the presence of global trade networks that were once so vital to Cairo's success has only grown stronger in today's world. While the specific goods that flowed through the medieval market may no longer be the same, the interconnected nature of trade continues. Cities like Cairo still sit at crossroads of global trade routes, connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Goods, ideas, and cultures continue to flow through cities around the world, just as they did in Cairo's medieval market. The nature of these exchanges may have evolved, but the basic premise of trade as a means of cultural connection remains unchanged. As we stand on the edge of Cairo's ancient marketplace, observing how the world has changed, we can't help but marvel at how much of the city's essence has endured. From the hustle and bustle of the vendors selling food, spices, and textiles, to the cultural exchanges and intellectual debates that took place on the market streets, Cairo's marketplace was never just about commerce. It was about creating a space where people could come together to share ideas, goods, and experiences. It was a space where culture and commerce intertwined, where communities formed, and where the rhythm of daily life played out in real time. The legacy of Cairo's marketplace continues to resonate in modern marketplaces across the world. The vendors, with their adaptability, resilience, and entrepreneurial spirit, remain at the heart of the market, just as they were centuries ago. Their role in shaping the cultural, social, and economic landscape of their communities continues to be vital, even as the markets themselves evolve. Whether it's through local street vendors or global digital platforms, the marketplace remains a space for exchange, a space for connection, and a space for people to build something more than just business. It's a place where cultures, ideas, and people come together to create a shared future. As we reach the final section of our journey through Cairo's 12th century marketplace, it's essential to reflect on the broader significance of the market in the context of the city's role in the medieval world. Cairo wasn't just another bustling trade hub. It was a beacon of civilization, a shining example of the power of urban life, culture, and commerce. The marketplace, with its vendors, customers, and merchants, played an essential role in maintaining Cairo's position as one of the most influential cities of the medieval period. It wasn't merely the scale of the market that made it significant. It was the way it connected the people of Cairo to the larger world and to each other. In many ways, Cairo's marketplace embodied the city's ethos. It was a place where the old and the new came together, where tradition met innovation, and where cultures intersected in dynamic, sometimes chaotic ways. The marketplace was a living testament to Cairo's role as a crossroads for trade, a hub for intellectual exchange, and a center for artistic and cultural growth. The vendors, the true lifeblood of the marketplace, were the ones who kept the pulse of the city beating. They weren't just traders, they were the cultural, social, and economic connectors who helped ensure that Cairo remained at the forefront of the medieval world. Looking at Cairo's market today, we can see its legacy in the vibrant markets of the modern world. From the souk of Marrakesh to the bazaars of Istanbul and even the local farmers' markets in today's global cities, the spirit of Cairo's marketplace lives on. The essence of what made Cairo's marketplace so unique: its bustling streets, its diversity, its competition and collaboration, its role in social and cultural exchange, continues to shape the way people engage with commerce and culture in our modern world. The vendors who populated Cairo's marketplace were much more than just sellers of goods. They were keepers of tradition, preservers of knowledge, and creators of culture. Through their work, they maintained a sense of continuity, ensuring that the cultural heritage of the city was passed on from one generation to the next. But they were also innovators, constantly adapting to the changing demands of their customers and the shifts in global trade. Their adaptability, resilience, and entrepreneurial spirit were essential to the marketplace's survival and success. They were the ones who allowed Cairo's marketplace to thrive through the ages, adapting to the forces of time and change. As we conclude our exploration of the 12th century marketplace, we also acknowledge the way it was a space of empowerment. Despite the challenges and inequities faced by many of the vendors, the marketplace offered them a chance to carve out their own identities and make a living. For women, for artisans, and for people from all walks of life, the marketplace was a place of opportunity and independence. Even amidst the rigid hierarchies of medieval Cairo, the marketplace allowed people to rise above their station, to gain respect, and to build something lasting. And then, of course, there was the sense of community. Cairo's marketplace was more than just a place for goods. It was a place for human connection. The interactions between vendors and customers, the exchange of stories and news, the laughter and friendly banter, all of these moments helped build a sense of community and shared experience. Whether it was the local merchant selling bread or the exotic spice vendor offering a sample, each interaction in the marketplace was part of a larger social network that bound the city together. As we think about the legacy of Cairo's marketplace, it's clear that it was much more than just a site for commerce. It was a cultural and social hub, a place where ideas were exchanged, relationships were formed, and communities were built. The vendors, through their hard work and dedication, helped to shape the very fabric of Cairo's identity. They were the unsung heroes of the marketplace, the ones who made sure the city's pulse never slowed. In conclusion, the marketplace in 12th century Cairo was much more than just a commercial space. It was a living, breathing entity that reflected the dynamic, interconnected nature of the city itself. From the traders who brought goods from far-off lands to the intellectuals who discussed the latest philosophical ideas, the market was a space where the world met, mingled, and merged. It was a space where culture, commerce, and community came together to create a vibrant, thriving center that was as essential to Cairo's identity as the Great Pyramids and the Nile River itself. The legacy of Cairo's marketplace, with its energy, its diversity, and its entrepreneurial spirit, continues to resonate in the world's markets today. It is a testament to the power of human connection, commerce, and culture, and it remains a reminder of the way in which the marketplace has always been more than just a place to buy and sell. It has always been a space where ideas, people, and cultures come together to create something larger than the sum of its parts. As we conclude our exploration of Cairo's medieval marketplace, take a moment to reflect on how the spirit of these ancient markets continues to shape the world today. The rhythms of trade, the relationships between buyers and sellers, and the exchange of goods and ideas are just as relevant now as they were hundreds of years ago. The market remains a symbol of cultural exchange, economic opportunity, and human connection. From the humble vendors to the bustling crowds, the marketplace is, and always has been, a place where the world comes together in vibrant, dynamic ways. The legacy of Cairo's marketplace lives on, and as we step away from this rich, historical world, we carry with us the lessons of resilience, innovation, and community that have defined the marketplace for centuries. Good night.